Our story begins on a quiet morning in the royal estate of the Welton family. A young man stirs awake in his bed, sighing deeply. The same dream has haunted him again. His name is Jamie Welton, the eldest son of the Welton royal family and its rightful heir. But Jamie is no ordinary noble. He is the reincarnation of Diablo Volfir, a powerful sorcerer who was defeated and sealed away long ago. Flashback to the past. Diablo Volfir stands defiantly as a glowing seal forms beneath his feet. He laughs, declaring that not even 12 gods together can defeat him. All they can do is trap him. Smirking, he mocks them, saying they can seal him however they like. But when he returns, their bright world will be swallowed by darkness. He promises them suffering so immense they'll beg for death. One of the gods replies calmly, saying they look forward to that day, but for now, Volfir will endure endless torment. The 12 gods then bind him in an eternal prison. Time passes, and a crack finally appears in their barrier. Diablo Volfir escapes, reborn as Jamie Welton, the cherished child of the Welton family. Returning to the present, Jamie is greeted by the cheerful voices of his parents. His father marvels at the baby's bright, sparkling eyes, which remind him of his wife's. She laughs, pointing out how much Jamie's expressions resemble his father's. When Jamie first wakes up in his new life, he doesn't understand what's happening. He tries to speak, but only babyish sounds come out. Confused, he wonders where he is, what's going on, and why he can't talk normally. Over time, Jamie grows up as an aristocrat, cherished by his loving parents. 9 years pass, and Jamie finds himself sitting by the window, lost in thought about his past life. Taking a deep breath, he thinks to himself that today will probably be another boring day. Suddenly, he hears hurried footsteps in the hallway. His nanny bursts into the room, greeting him with a cheerful, "Good morning, young master." Jamie turns to greet her politely. She walks over, smiling, and asks why he's up so early. Jamie explains that he's admiring the morning sky, which looks especially beautiful. The nanny's face lights up as she praises him, calling him wonderful. Jamie glances away, thinking her compliment is a bit much. The nanny starts helping him get dressed and remarks that enjoying the sky is nice, but his parents are waiting for him. She asks if he minds her assistance, and Jamie agrees without hesitation. Once he's ready, the nanny leads him to the dining room. Jamie lets out a quiet sigh, already feeling the monotony of the day. His family is gathered around the table, and his mother greets him warmly. As Jamie sits down, his mother gushes about how adorable the children are, teasingly saying their cuteness must come from her husband. Jamie smiles politely, but his thoughts drift to his mother's noble lineage. Sears Bell Welton, the only daughter of the Bell family, is an important figure in this new life of his. Jamie's father, Arjuna Welton, the head of the royal family, is one of the kingdom's 5 sword masters. Arjuna chuckles at his wife's compliment, saying their children are angels because they take after her. He adds that their sparkling eyes are proof of it. Jamie looks at his younger sister, Sarah Welton, the second child of the family. Sarah picks up a piece of food with her fork and playfully tells Jamie to open wide. Jamie obliges, thanking her for feeding him such delicious food. In return, he picks up a bite of her favorite dish and feeds her back. Their parents watch with happy smiles, but Jamie hides his expression, annoyed by how dull it all feels. All he wants is some peace and quiet. After breakfast, Jamie retreats to his room. He collapses face first onto his pillow, muttering to himself that he can't get used to how cute his family can be. Hugging his pillow, he thinks of ways to pass the time, like exploring the private library. Yet, a darker thought crosses his mind. He wishes he could just die because of his inability to speak properly, as if his tongue doesn't work right. Despite this, he admits he has grown fond of the mansion. Suddenly, a flying eye lands on his head. Jamie grabs it, realizing his reincarnation has granted him new powers. Crushing the eye in his hand, he watches its black blood spread over his fingers. He thinks bitterly of the 12 gods, clinging to their beliefs like parasites. Even though he's weak now, Jamie knows time is on his side. In a world that has forgotten much about dark magic, the gods may still look down on him, but that won't last forever. Just then, his nanny bursts into the room, reminding him it's time to read children's books with his mother. Jamie stays silent, curses flashing through his mind. When she calls his name again, he forces a smile and says he's coming. As he follows her, he thinks sarcastically that pretending to be the cute little boy might as well be worse than being sealed again. When they arrive, Jamie greets his mother and sister with a polite smile, asking what book they'll read today. Sears and Sarah, surprised by his sweetness, rush to hug him tightly, squeezing him with affection. Jamie endures it with a forced grin, cursing internally. Sears showers Jamie with affection, her love evident in every gesture, while Jamie quietly endures it. She introduces the book they will read, The Great Magician Heine's, and asks if the children like the name. The children settle beside her as she begins reading the fairy tale. After finishing, she closes the book, announcing that Heine's lives happily ever after, and asks if they enjoy the story. Jamie smiles and expresses his admiration for Heinz, saying he wants to become a magician like him. Sears responds with praise, reminding Jamie of his intelligence and how he has already defeated 3 of his magic teachers. Jamie wonders silently if she is mocking him. Sears pats his head and mentions that his father has invited the kingdom's most powerful magician specifically for him. Jamie studies her face and concludes that she is not joking. Forcing another smile, he acknowledges how wonderful his father is. Rising from the couch, he prepares to leave, but Sears stops him, reminding him to enjoy the fresh air instead of spending all his time in the library. She opens her arms, insisting he hug her. With a heavy sigh, Jamie reluctantly complies, thinking about how much he wants to leave. She suggests he play with her instead, squeezing him tightly as he inwardly begs her to stop. Later, Jamie sits by the window, reading a book. He closes it with a sigh, disappointed that it offers no new insights on mana. Frustrated by the lack of useful material in the library, he realizes it is already lunchtime. Dreading another meal with his family, Jamie hurries to the dining room, hoping to arrive before the nanny fetches him. On his way out, he encounters an old man in the corridor. The old man gazes at the statue near the dining room entrance and comments on the rarity of using such an artifact as decoration, something fitting for the prestigious Welton family. Jamie, observing him, begins to wonder who this man could be. When the old man finally notices Jamie, he greets him with a calm demeanor. Jamie studies him and immediately senses the sheer amount of mana radiating from him, flowing endlessly like a powerful storm. He quickly concludes that this man must be a 7th-level magician at the very least. Growing suspicious, Jamie questions how someone like this entered the mansion. He considers the possibility of teleportation or even robbery, but quickly dismisses the idea when he notices the old man's composed behavior. It doesn't match that of someone invading the residence of a swordmaster. The old man, meanwhile, observes Jamie's reaction closely. Jamie demands to know the man's identity and how he got there, reminding him that this is not a public space. The old man senses Jamie's aura and notes that the boy's strength is remarkable, comparable to a tiger cub destined to grow into a full-fledged tiger, much like his father. Impressed, the old man silently concludes that Jamie is no ordinary child. However, he remains silent, refusing to answer Jamie's question. Jamie finds this infuriating, interpreting the man's calm attitude as condescension. Feeling disrespected, Jamie thinks the old man should kneel before him, yet here he stands, acting as if everything is perfectly normal. Jamie's annoyance boils over into anger. Deciding to teach the man a lesson, Jamie prepares to unleash his magic, determined to show him the consequences of underestimating him. The old man, observing Jamie's intentions, acknowledges the boy's formidable strength and realizes the rumors about him are not exaggerated. Despite his young age, Jamie's mana is extraordinary. Intrigued, the old man decides to test Jamie by using magic himself. Jamie notices the old man's actions, and his face twists with rage. Inwardly, he seethes, questioning how this fool dares to challenge him, Diablo Volfir, who in a past life nearly destroyed all the gods. Jamie fires a flash at the old man, but he remains standing, totally unharmed. Only a little dust rises at the entrance to the dining room. Jamie thinks this is not at all what he imagined. It does nothing to the man. The old man smiles widely and seems impressed. He wonders aloud if Jamie is really only 9 years old. He shouts that it was a good try and declares that it is now his turn. He channels his magic toward Jamie, who thinks the man is incredibly skilled. A bright flash flies in Jamie's direction, but he realizes the spell isn't actually aimed at him, meaning he doesn't need to evade it. The old man is surprised and notices that Jamie doesn't even flinch. At that very moment, Argino appears, protecting Jamie from the magic. He tells the old man that he has gone too far. Argino then walks up to Jamie and asks if he is okay. Jamie confirms that he is fine and pretends to wipe away his tears. Argino is surprised, thinking his child is crying. He turns furiously to the old man, Marquis Linmel, and says he wants to have a few words with him. Jamie looks at the old man with a malicious smile. Marquis, noticing the change in Jamie's behavior, thinks Jamie is acting more modestly in front of his father. Marquis laughs hard, finding the situation surprising and quite funny. He even says he envies Argino. Argino is taken aback and wonders if Marquis attacked his child because he is unwell. Afterward, the two retire to Argino's office and begin drinking tea. Argino places his cup on the table and reminds Marquis that Jamie is his son and the heir to the Welton family. Marquis takes a sip of tea and replies that he knows. Argino, displeased, asks what he means by that. Marquis tells him to calm down, mentioning that Argino's aura makes him uneasy. As expected from a swordmaster, it is quite intimidating. The Marquis then asks how much Argino really knows about Jamie. Argino replies, asking what he should know. The Marquis answers that Argino should understand how brilliant Jamie truly is. This makes Argino angry, and he says that's why he trusted the Marquis with Jamie, only for the Marquis to suddenly attack him. Observing Argino's anger, the Marquis thinks to himself that Argino doesn't know anything about Jamie. He decides to pretend he didn't hear Argino's words. Argino asks what the Marquis means by that. As he reflects on it, he remembers that Marquis Lin-Mel, who is considered the most powerful 8th grade magician alive, probably wouldn't recognize Jamie's potential. This leads him to wonder if Jamie might not be as talented as he believed. The Marquis notices Argino's doubts and quickly clarifies that this isn't what he meant. Argino asks him to explain more clearly. The Marquis responds that he couldn't take Jamie as an apprentice because he wouldn't be able to handle him. Argino is stunned and asks if an 8th-level magician can't handle Jamie. Then who can? The Marquis smiles and says that Jamie can already read his movements. Argino is shocked, thinking that's impossible no matter how smart Jamie is. The Marquis continues, saying Jamie also figured out that the spell wasn't aimed at him and didn't even flinch. That's not all. Jamie has already reached 3rd-class magician status through self-training. Despite his young age and physical limitations, his skill level is even higher than 4th class. Argino is surprised but pleased. The Marquis adds that Jamie isn't just a genius, he's a monster. This child doesn't need a teacher, he just needs their support to keep growing. The Marquis speculates that they may have just given birth to a legendary 9th grade magician. Argino remains silent, clenching his fist in shock, wondering if Jamie can really become a legendary 9th grade magician. The Marquis rises from the couch and apologizes for attacking Jamie. He says that enormous discoveries await in magic, in the entire world. Laughing, he adds that it will be quite fun. With a flash of bright sparks, his body disappears from the office. Argino remains seated, lost in thought, reflecting on everything that just happened. He leans back and lets out a heavy sigh. As night falls, Jamie returns to his room, muttering how tired he is. His mother, having learned of the old man's actions, begins to fuss over him, wrapping him tightly in her arms and asking if he's okay. She wonders if he was terribly scared and promises to deal with the old man. Jamie, frustrated, thinks about how much time he's wasted. He removes his jewelry and examines the real spell. It's not bad at all. The composition, technique, balance, and type are all top-notch. But rather than being impressed with the Marquis, Jamie finds himself more impressed by his father, Count Argino Welton. He smiles, chuckling to himself, acknowledging his father's strength, and admitting that his father truly deserves to be his father. Suddenly, Marquis's voice cuts through the silence, asking what's so amusing. Jamie turns to see the old man sitting on his bed, his face twisted in a terrible grimace. Marquis remarks that Jamie must have been so deep in thought that he didn't even notice him. Startled, Jamie screams in fear, falling to the floor. He demands to know why Marquis is there, accusing him of scaring him. The Marquis laughs and asks if Jamie is really so easy to frighten. Jamie insists on knowing how the Marquis got into his room. The Marquis casually explains that he teleported into the room. Jamie mutters under his breath, realizing that his father must have allowed the Marquis to live. Though he already knows Marquis is unusual, the ability to teleport in without any issues makes him uneasy. The Marquis grins, commenting on how humble Jamie is around his father, and questions why Jamie acts so differently with him. Jamie picks himself up off the floor and counters, asking if Marquis really thinks family and strangers are the same. The old man laughs, calling Jamie amusing, then adds that he wishes Jamie were a little stronger. Jamie asks what he means by that, and starts wondering who this strange old man really is and why he looks at him in such a peculiar way, especially since they've only just met. Marquis hands him a book, saying it's for him. Jamie examines it, and realizes it must be a magical memoir. The book falls into his hands, and he asks why Marquis is giving it to him. Marquis explains that the magic Jamie uses has become obsolete, so he decided to give him the book. Jamie finds the comment humiliating, understanding that Marquis is implying his magic is outdated. Marquis asks if Jamie is so moved by the gift. He clarifies that the book contains many of his original spells, and that Jamie will be the first to read it. Excited, Jamie immediately opens the book and starts examining the spells created by the great magician. He wonders how the magic of Marquis's time differs from his own, and resolves to prove his worth, even if Marquis thinks his magic is outdated. Suddenly, Marquis speaks again. Jamie looks up from the book as Marquis begins to disappear, his voice filled with high hopes for Jamie. He speculates about how much stronger Jamie will become by the time they meet again. As the Marquis fades from view, Jamie confidently replies that he will be much stronger than Marquis can imagine. Jamie returns his attention to the book, his eyes scanning the text. It describes a method where one channels all the magic in the world through themselves, absorbing it with their heart. This technique is the most effective way to control mana. However, there's a significant limitation. The amount of mana that can be absorbed is restricted. Marquis's earlier comment about Jamie's magic being outdated makes Jamie reflect on the kind of spells Marquis has created. As he flips through the pages, he finds the methods both amusing and complex. He realizes that the technique requires him to feel every particle of mana, allowing it to pass through his entire body and skin. Feeling exhausted, Jamie lies down on the bed, acknowledging that mastering this method will take considerable effort. He thinks about how old techniques can't easily be surpassed, but recognizes two key flaws in the method. Smiling, he reaffirms his identity as Diablo Volfir. With renewed enthusiasm, Jamie rises from the bed, opens the book again, and admits that Marquis has given him a new perspective. Determined, he vows to read every page. However, he realizes he'll need assistance. Snapping his fingers, he summons a flying eye, which lands on his shoulder. Jamie turns to the flying eye, asking if it can release some mana. The familiar black responds with a sound, focuses, and then sharply opens its eye as it rises into the air. Jamie watches intently, noting the first disadvantage of the technique. The absorption of mana by the body has a limit, meaning he will need to carefully maintain the right proportions. However, with Black's help, this issue will be resolved. Since Black shares a soul contract with Jamie, it can burn the required amount of mana, ensuring that the proportions remain balanced. With the first disadvantage addressed, Jamie shifts his focus to the second problem. The second challenge, Jamie realizes, lies in his own body. If his heart can only accept a limited amount of mana, he reasons that the solution is simple. He just needs to distribute the mana throughout his entire body. This approach, he concludes, will eliminate any restrictions and allow him to harness the mana without limit. The next morning, the nanny calls for the Count to come to Jamie's room. She peers in anxiously, noticing Jamie sitting on his bed, deep in meditation. Concerned about Jamie, she calls out to the Count. Argino enters the room and asks what's wrong. The nanny explains that something seems off with the young master. The Count watches Jamie closely and sees that mana is swirling around him. Although he knows Marquis has given Jamie something, he's amazed that his son has learned to manipulate mana in just one night. He wonders if his sweet son truly has so many hidden talents. Instructing the nanny to leave Jamie undisturbed for the day, Argino adds that someone should be placed at his door to keep watch. The nanny assures him she will personally keep an eye on Jamie, so there is no need to worry. As Argino leaves, the nanny expresses her hope that everything will be okay with the young master. Walking away from the room, the Count reflects on the idea of Jamie becoming a magician instead of a swordsman. He wonders if this is influenced by his wife's family. But even so, Jamie's abilities are beyond his expectations. A smile spreads across his face as he imagines Jamie potentially becoming a 9th-grade magician. Time passes, and Jamie eventually opens his eyes, joyfully proclaiming his success. At first, managing mana is difficult because of its unpredictable movements, but after several attempts, he succeeds. However, he realizes his current limit is at the 4th level, and he sighs in disappointment, frustrated that he's already nearing this limitation. The little black familiar on his head squeaks, prompting Jamie to look up and ask what it wants. He acknowledges that he has no immediate desire to improve his physical abilities, understanding that he is still too young and weak. The black familiar moves to Jamie's shoulder, squeaking again. Jamie smiles, glad for its support, and decides to be patient. He knows he has already made good progress, so the next step won't be too hard. He tells Black to use a spell called Indisability, which makes him disappear like he's vanished into thin air. Jamie thinks about meeting his father but knows he must hide his mana. If his father discovers his true abilities, everything could go wrong. Black hides Jamie's mana, and Jamie notices that he can barely feel its presence, which is just what he wanted. Confident that his father won't detect him, Jamie leaves his room, ready to meet him. He walks through the corridors with a faint black aura around him. Meanwhile, the Count is in a meeting with a priest. The Count looks busy and asks the priest why he's there. The priest answers that he just wanted to greet him and thank him for allowing the genus religion to grow in Hisa territory. The Count explains that he supports his community, which is why he's given the genus religion a chance. The priest asks for more details, so the Count adds that since the Zenith religion is gaining popularity, he wants to make it the strongest in his lands. The priest understands that the Count is showing his authority and warns him not to treat his followers as tools of the gods. Though he's heard rumors about the Count, The priest now takes him more seriously. The Count, sensing the meeting should end, says he's very busy. The priest laughs, thanks him, and leaves, blessing him with wishes from the great Zenith. The Count smiles politely but drops it as soon as the door shuts behind the priest. Jamie, hiding behind a column, watches the priest leave. He notices the crescent moon symbol with a yellow sphere and feels a dark energy coming from him. Jamie wonders why such a person is here and how the Zenith religion ended up in his homeland. He bites his nails, questioning why his father has made his land so religious and why he chose the Zenith religion specifically. Jamie concludes that the religion has no place in their lands and realizes his only choice is to convince his father to drive them away, especially since the religion is officially sanctioned. Determined to start his investigation, Jamie approaches his father's door and announces himself. They move to the living room, where Jamie proudly shares his progress. Argino expresses his pride, asking if that means Jamie has mastered everything. Jamie confirms, and Argino notes that Jamie must really enjoy magic. Jamie responds that magic is simply very powerful. Argino's expression shifts, and Jamie asks if something is wrong. Argino admits he had imagined Jamie would grow up like any other child. Jamie asks what he means by that. Argino reflects on Jamie's hidden talents and the difficulties of living as a genius. He thinks about how people often admire talented children at first, only to grow tired and criticize them later. He wonders if embracing his genius is truly in Jamie's best interest. Argino grips the armrest and tells Jamie that if he doesn't enjoy magic, he can stop and pursue something else. However, if Jamie is determined to follow this path, Argino promises not to oppose him and will support him as best he can. Jamie smiles and reassures his father not to worry, affirming he will never give up magic. Argino smiles back, impressed. He looks at Jamie, marveling at how much mana a 9-year-old can possess. He can already feel mana radiating from Jamie's entire body. Suddenly, he realizes that the mana seems to be stored throughout Jamie's body, not just his heart. Concerned, he asks if Jamie has learned everything from the memoirs Marquess Linmel gave him the previous day. Jamie confirms, adding to himself that he has also improved some of the techniques described in the book. A cold sweat rolls down Argino's face as he wonders how much Marquess has taught Jamie. He questions how a child could learn so much in just one day, and begins to consider the possibility that Jamie might truly become a legendary 9th-grade magician. Laughing at the thought, he admits to himself that compared to Jamie, he feels insignificant. Argino expresses his pride in Jamie, laughing heartily that day. Jamie laughs along, but as his father pats him on the head, his amusement turns awkward. He silently wishes his father would stop. Suddenly, Argino points at Black and asks if Jamie summoned the creature himself. Startled, Jamie nervously asks if his father can see it. In a panic, Black flies above Jamie's head, and Jamie realizes, despite his efforts to make Black invisible, his father can see it. Argino smiles, observing the familiar shape. He notes that it looks like a bat but seems too round and cute to be one. He spreads his arms to show its size and asks if he's right. Jamie, unsure of his father's strength, wonders if Argino has figured out that he used dark magic to create the familiar. He admits to shaping it as a bat and explains that he tried to hide it, thinking his father would be surprised. Argino hugs him immediately, amazed at his talent and proudly declaring how lucky he is to have such a genius for a son. After a while, Jamie leaves the room, feeling exhausted and overwhelmed by his family's affection. He wonders why they love him so much. As night falls, Jamie puts on his cloak and summons Black. The familiar appears behind him, its large black wings flapping. Jamie declares that he needs to uncover why the religion has chosen his territory and decides it's time to take action. Black picks him up, and together, they soar into the sky above the night city. Meanwhile, in an alley, 2 men from a criminal organization meet. One asks what the boss has said. The other replies that the boss has instructed them to follow the plan carefully to avoid death. Sighing, the first man wonders what the future holds for them. Philip, one of the men, admits he doesn't understand what they've gotten into with their boss. Jance, his partner, explains that the boss is willing to sacrifice anything to achieve his goals. He points out that Hisa is a land where even Earl Welton allows organizations like theirs to coexist, as long as they don't cross certain lines. However, human trafficking has clearly crossed that line. Philip hopes they can escape quietly without getting caught. Jance dismisses this, asserting they will inevitably be caught. He emphasizes the Count's love for his children, and notes that if the Count discovers they are using children for human trafficking, he will eliminate all criminal organizations in the city. Philip counters that the boss seems confident they won't get caught. Jance grits his teeth, questioning if the boss really thinks a swordmaster won't catch them. Philip replies that Han Ni's people will supposedly help them. Jance scoffs, remarking that Han Ni is willing to do anything. Philip wonders aloud what their options are, escape or betrayal. Jance insists betrayal is out of the question due to the underworld's strict rules and suggests they try to escape. Philip agrees, arguing that it's better to die trying to escape than any other way. Jance, however, worries that no matter how vast the lands are, they'll be hunted down either way. Philip acknowledges the concern but decides to wait and see how things unfold. As they speak, Jamie quietly sneaks up behind them. Jance asks who initiated the slave trade in this territory, while Jamie peeks around the corner, listening intently. Philip speculates that the boss must have received an irresistible offer and acted on impulse, though he's still unsure of the motive. Suddenly, the men notice Jamie. They demand to know who he is, and Jamie, smiling, simply remarks that he finds the situation very interesting. Jance clenches his fist and declares that if Jamie won't talk, he should prepare to die. He and Philip attack Jamie, but Jamie suddenly disappears, leaving them searching frantically. Jance remarks in confusion that Jamie has vanished, insisting there is no one there. Suddenly, Jamie's voice echoes, freezing them in place. Jamie asks them what they have been discussing so enthusiastically. He reappears before them, kneeling, and demands to hear everything, preferably with all the details. Using his magic, he terrifies them into submission. Both men sit down and confess everything. Jamie listens in silence, realizing that they are trafficking people, including children. He reflects bitterly that these are the types of people his father despises most. He finds their actions infuriating and wonders if they have some death wish. He thinks about how both gods and humans manipulate others for their own ends, noting that these criminals are no different from the gods. He also questions what their boss has been thinking when assigning them such a mission. Certain that his father would detest this, Jamie feels a bad premonition. He jumps off the boxes he has been sitting on and uses magic on the men, commanding them to go to the Count's estate and confess everything they know. The two men, compelled by his magic, stand up to obey. Jamie remarks that the morning will certainly be tumultuous. As the robbers make their way to the estate, Jamie instructs Black to prepare for their return. Before they can take off, however, both men are violently thrown back at lightning speed. Philip hits the wall, leaving a gaping hole in his stomach, while his companion is completely burned. Philip's lifeless body falls onto the road with a sickening sound. Jamie turns to see what has happened. Suddenly, a man's laughter erupts behind him, mocking the fallen men as thick-headed idiots. One of the man's accomplices reminds him to keep quiet, fearing that the guards might already be following them. Jamie turns to face them and tries to process what kind of person this loud, deranged individual might be. Using his magic, Jamie addresses the man, demanding to know why he dared to attack those under his command. A magic circle appears behind Jamie as he casts a spell on the fallen robbers, forbidding them to die until they complete his instructions. Their wounds begin to heal, shocking Han Ni, who is responsible for the attack. Han Ni notices Jamie and sarcastically remarks on the unexpected guest, instructing his subordinates to capture both Jamie and the two injured men. As Jamie continues his spell, Han Ni barks at his subordinates to hurry, threatening them with death if they delay. Two men begin dragging Philip and Jance, who are almost fully healed. Han Ni mocks them further, promising to kill them again later. A tear rolls down Philip's cheek as he pleads with Jamie for help. Jamie, watching them being dragged away, calls Han Ni scum. Han Ni laughs mockingly and dismisses Jamie's words. Suddenly, a sharp magical projectile flies toward Jamie, aimed at his head. Han Ni gleefully attacks, piercing Jamie's body repeatedly with magic, laughing maniacally and enjoying the sight. He declares that it is so cool and wants to hear Jamie scream before his death. Han Ni burns Jamie's body to ash and turns to his accomplice, who watches in horror. The accomplice asks why Han Ni killed him, but Han Ni seems confused, saying he had aimed for the boy. Suddenly, Jamie's voice speaks directly into Han Ni's ear, asking if he has enjoyed himself. Startled, Han Ni backs away as Jamie confronts him, questioning his amusement at killing his partner. Han Ni begins to panic, realizing that he has mistakenly killed someone else and that Jamie is alive. The ominous aura emanating from Jamie leaves him paralyzed with fear. Jamie criticizes Han Ni's arrogance, calling him out for overestimating his abilities as a third-class wizard. Han Ni, enraged and terrified, attempts to use the Buster spell, summoning a massive stream of fire intended to incinerate Jamie completely. Confident in the spell's power, Han Ni believes it will reduce Jamie to ashes. Amid the blinding flash of magic, Jamie stands unharmed and begins explaining the human psyche. He states that people feel utterly helpless when facing someone far stronger than themselves, which is why he enjoys manipulating those weaker than him. Han Ni collapses to his knees, his face hitting the ground. He lies motionless, overwhelmed by Jamie's power. Han Ni's partner, witnessing the ease with which Jamie defeats him, calls Jamie a monster and decides to flee. Before he can escape, Jamie uses dark magic to surround their bodies, compressing them painfully. The bandits scream in agony as Jamie's magic crushes them. Jamie approaches Han Ni, announcing that his time has come. He grabs Han Ni by the hair, lifting his head, and declares that Han Ni will answer all his questions as his slave. Han Ni immediately addresses him as master and obeys without resistance. Han Ni begins talking about little children, but Jamie cuts him off, saying he has heard it all before. He tells Han Ni that attempting to manipulate him is a waste of time. Jamie thinks to himself that his father will eventually discover the truth, thanks to the 2 bandits he has already sent. He lets Han Ni go and considers what to do with him. Although he has stopped Han Ni's death, his soul is almost completely destroyed. While his body is physically fine, it won't sustain him for long. Jamie contemplates his options. Since Han Ni is only a 3rd-class magician, he could potentially turn him into an undead. However, due to his damaged soul, Han Ni would decay rapidly, even if revived. Jamie realizes that while Han Ni might appear normal on a battlefield, his decaying state would draw too much attention in a peaceful place like this. With no better alternative, Jamie decides to try another method. Smiling, he reasons that as a 3rd-class magician, Han Ni should have enough mana for his needs. He points his hand toward Han Ni's head and begins absorbing his mana, wishing himself a bon appetit. After finishing, Han Ni's body begins to boil. Jamie remarks that the mana isn't bad, though it contains impurities due to Han Ni's human nature. He feels fortunate to consume such a large amount of mana and wipes his lips with a handkerchief. Turning to Philip and Jance, Jamie wonders aloud what to do with them. Approaching them, he observes that even though he has given them some of his mana, they won't survive long in their current state. Sparks of dark magic separate from Jamie's body, and Black materializes from the energy. Black squeaks inquisitively, and Jamie addresses the 2 bandits, saying that because they still have unfinished business, he can't let them die. Jamie decides to use necromancy, a magical technique for reviving dead bodies. He reflects that necromancy isn't the same as resurrection. Bodies revived through necromancy aren't truly alive but are undead, existing in a state contrary to the laws of nature. These undead creatures are neither fully alive nor fully dead. Jamie instructs Black to assist him, and the familiar rises into the sky, waiting for the command. Jamie initiates the spell and addresses the bandits, commanding them to relinquish their mortality and rebel against death. Philip's veins bulge as Jamie notes that his spirit still lingers in the afterlife. Jamie declares that immortality awaits them and urges them to forsake death. The bandits' eyes roll back as tears stream down their faces. Screaming in agony, Philip and Jance are brought back to life with Black's help. Once the ritual is complete, the bandits kneel before Jamie, pledging their loyalty and awaiting his orders. Jamie stares at them in disbelief, wondering if the process is truly finished. He notices lingering black smoke around them and questions if he has made a mistake. Black lands on his head, squeaking guiltily. Jamie, annoyed, asks what Black has done wrong. Jamie reassures Black not to worry, insisting that everything has been done perfectly. Still frustrated, Jamie tugs at Black in irritation and admits that, although he knows the mistake is his, it is difficult to accept. Black squeals in response, and Jamie admits that he usually doesn't dwell on past successes. However, he is upset that all his previous undead servants are now missing. Black squeals for Jamie to stop, and Jamie remarks that he can't use the bandits in their current state anyway. He decides it would be better to get rid of them. Stroking his chin, he notes that with the black smoke emanating from them, they wouldn't be able to carry out Zenith's orders, or even walk down the street without attracting attention. Suddenly, Black starts swaying side to side before unexpectedly biting Jamie on the cheek. Annoyed, Jamie exclaims at the audacity of his familiar and questions who gave it permission to bite its master. Black quickly flies away, landing on Azard's head, where it begins absorbing all the dark haze surrounding the bandits. Jamie, surprised, asks if Black is even capable of such a thing. Black chews the dark haze persistently, and after some time, not a single trace of it remains. Jamie acknowledges that the bandits can now be useful and turns his attention to Black, who has grown significantly larger from the haze it has consumed. Jamie pets Black and praises it for a job well done. Jamie then turns to the 2 bandits and decides to give them new names. He commands them to rebel and names Jance, Azard, and Philip, Ryza. After repeatedly ordering them to rebel, they finally regain consciousness. Jamie waves his hand, and the bandits, now free of the haze, stare ahead in confusion. Observing their blank and surprised faces, Jamie concludes that they likely have no idea what is happening. He decides to give them some time to adjust. After a long silence, Azard finally breaks it by asking if Jamie is the one who brought him back to life. Jamie confirms that this is indeed the case. Azard grows fearful, trying to comprehend who Jamie is. He thinks about how young Jamie appears, likely only 9 or 10 years old, yet exudes a massive, ominous aura. Azard compares him to a sinister character from a childhood story, a creature that defies the world itself, something that shouldn't exist in this reality. Jamie grins and asks if he looks like a demon lord in their eyes. Ryza, nervous but resolute, declares that he doesn't care if Jamie is a demon lord or something else. To him, Jamie looks like a human. Jamie, intrigued by Ryza's defiance, thinks there must be flaws in his spell since Ryza seems unaware of who his master now is. Extending his index finger forward, Jamie decides that this behavior can't be overlooked. He points downward, causing Ryza to fall abruptly, hitting his head on the ground. Jamie approaches Ryza and warns him that he will forgive the transgression this time, but if he ever makes that face again, there will be consequences. Terrified, Ryza acknowledges the warning, and Jamie turns to Azard, stating that the same applies to him. Azard quickly agrees, and Jamie reflects on the nature of soul subjugation. He understands that it doesn't matter what they want. As long as they are bound by the contract, their lives belong to it. This, he muses, is the essence of dark magic. Suddenly, Jamie remembers something and clarifies that he is not a demon lord. Azard hesitantly asks who he is. Jamie removes his hood and, with a smile, reveals that he is an ordinary dark magician. A magician who once tried to kill the gods and now lives solely for that purpose. Jamie instructs his new subordinates to keep a close eye on the Zenith Church and gather information about it. He tells them to bring him anyone who might have knowledge about human trafficking, emphasizing that such a person must be the one to reveal everything to his father. The two bandits obey without question. After issuing the orders, Jamie vanishes. Ryza looks up, sighs in relief, and remarks that Jamie is gone. Azard also sighs, and they exchange glances. Hesitantly, Azard suggests they start their work, and Ryza agrees, acknowledging that they have no choice but to follow Jamie's commands. Meanwhile, Black expresses its complaints to Jamie, who reassures it that everything will be fine. He explains that the bandits are too afraid to disobey his orders. Black sits on Jamie's shoulder as he remarks that, thanks to their efforts, his father will be able to address the problem of the slave trade personally. Black, however, bites Jamie on the cheek again, squealing. Jamie responds by saying he can't allow the trade to continue in these lands, as they will one day belong to him. Suddenly, footsteps approach, and Jamie tells Black that they need to finish for the day. Out of nowhere, a boy runs into Jamie's back and falls to the ground. Confused, the boy wonders if he has crashed into someone. Annoyed, Jamie turns around and asks if the boy is blind. His irritation turns to curiosity when he realizes the boy is a child. The boy points out that Jamie is also a child. Black clings to Jamie's hair as Jamie admits that he is only 9 years old. He decides to let the boy go this time, but warns him to be more careful in the future. Jamie walks away, and the boy quietly mutters that Jamie acts like an adult despite having no gray hairs on his head. Just then, Black pulls on Jamie's hair, making him stop abruptly. Jamie turns around, surprised, and the boy frowns, asking what he wants. Jamie glances at Black and realizes the familiar has reacted to the boy's comment about his hair color. Annoyed, Jamie wonders how Black has become so unruly and thinks it lacks proper manners. Turning to the boy, Jamie threatens him, warning him to watch his words unless he wants to face consequences. Frightened, the boy apologizes profusely and runs off. Jamie sighs and asks Black if it is satisfied now. Black squeals contentedly, and Jamie decides they need to return home quickly. Once home, Jamie sits on his bed and scolds Black, asking if it understands what it has done. Black squeals apologetically, but Jamie warns that if it pulls a similar stunt again, the consequences will be harsher. Black squeaks again, and Jamie wonders where Black could have picked up such behavior. Lying down on his bed, Jamie laments how tired he is. He realizes he has used more power than anticipated and has much more work ahead. He notes that his once easy and carefree life is over. Jamie reflects on the looming threat of Zenith, a god he despises, whose influence is spreading in his territory. The thought of Zenith makes him clench his fist. Placing his hand on his forehead, Jamie resolves to face whatever challenges Zenith and his followers bring, declaring that he will destroy them all. Meanwhile, Azard returns to the shelter to continue their work. He asks where the older brother is. A frightened man hesitates and nervously inquires if Azard is alive. Ignoring the question, Azard repeats his demand to know the older brother's whereabouts. The man finally admits that Han-Ni has declared he will personally kill both Azard and Ryza. Stammering, he questions why Azard is still alive. Azard, frustrated, thinks about how he could have been overwhelmed by such weaklings who don't even know how to use mana. He punches the wall behind him and, addressing Pep, demands he not make him repeat himself. Pep, overwhelmed by fear, thinks about Azard's newfound strength and wonders what has happened to him. More importantly, He questions where all the other guys are. Pep realizes that if others know Jance has returned, it will cause chaos. But it seems like Azard and Reza have already dealt with everyone. Unsure of what to do, Pep raises his hands in surrender and says he doesn't know where his elder brother has gone. Reza steps forward and asks if Pep is sure about that. Terrified, Pep nervously addresses him and insists he is telling the truth, stuttering and smiling nervously. He assures them they can ask anyone, and they will say the same. Reza, unconvinced, thinks about how tired he is, and decides it is time to find the boss to fulfill Jamie's orders. Since the boss is well informed about everything happening in the city, Reza reasons that he might also know something about the Zenith Church. Reza asks Pep where the boss might be. Pep panics internally, realizing he needs to give a convincing answer or risk losing his life. After thinking quickly, he replies that the boss likes girls and drinking, so he is likely at one of the nearby bars. Azard glances at Reza and agrees that Pep might be right. Reza nods and suggests they check out all the bars. Pep sighs in relief, thinking he has avoided danger. However, his relief is short-lived as Azard strikes him in the face and suggests taking him as a witness since the master has ordered them to find one. Azard debates aloud where they can hide Pep and suggests tying him up in the forest. Reza, kicking Pep, agrees with the idea, but proposes locking him in the basement of his house instead. He reminds Azard that they have wasted enough time and need to leave. Azard slings Pep over his shoulder, and the two leave to continue their mission. Later, a young boy enters a room filled with corpses. Shocked, he asks what has happened and confirms to himself that everyone inside is dead. He worries that he will be beaten again for not meeting his quota the previous day, but realizes there is no one left who can punish him. Panicked, he runs toward the exit, deciding to escape before anyone can suspect him of wrongdoing. Morning arrives, and Jamie wakes up feeling exhausted. Stretching and yawning, he notes how tired he is, and isn't surprised he has slept so long. He reflects that avoiding certain people might no longer be possible. Heading to the dining room, he tells Black to disappear to avoid catching his father's attention. Black obeys, and Jamie enters the dining room, greeting his parents and asking how they slept. His father wishes him good morning, and his sister Sarah cheerfully replies that she slept very well. Noticing his mother isn't at the table, Jamie asks where she is. Suddenly, his mother pounces on him from behind her hiding place, exclaiming that she is right there. Startled, Jamie screams and asks where she has been hiding, admitting he hadn't noticed her. His mother teases him, questioning if he is serious. Jamie looks away, privately admitting to himself that he had known she was behind the door all along. His mother pats him on the head and asks if her little Jamie had been scared. Jamie, playing along, confirms that he is fine once he realized it was her. His mother smiles and compliments his manners. Jamie, realizing what is coming, tries to redirect the attention, suggesting they start eating. Ignoring him, his mother snuggles up to him, calling him cute and wanting to hug him again. Sarah joins in, saying she wants a hug too. Jamie, overwhelmed, internally screams for someone to stop them. The family sits at the table, and Sears hugs Sarah affectionately, calling her sweetie. Jamie glances at Sarah and muses about how soft children's cheeks are. He briefly entertains the idea of squeezing her cheeks but catches himself, embarrassed by the thought. Hiding his face on the table, he realizes how much he has grown accustomed to this calm, familial life. After breakfast, Sears mentions that everything will begin tomorrow. Her husband agrees, and Jamie, picking up Sarah in his arms, asks what will happen. Argino turns to his wife and asks if she hasn't told the children. Sears looks away, admitting that she forgot because she has been so worried about their son. Jamie assumes she is referring to the technique he used earlier, knowing how much she tends to worry. Lowering his eyes, Jamie apologizes sincerely. Sears reassures him, acknowledging that nothing serious will likely happen to him, but warns him against exhausting himself. She adds that if he keeps pushing himself, it might break her heart, and she might faint in the corridor from sadness. Jamie promises not to do it again and repeats his question about what is happening tomorrow. Laughing, Sears reveals that the family will be attending a ball together. Jamie immediately realizes it is the grand ball organized by Earl Simon and Earl Welton, where nearly all the nobility of the Northern Seldom Empire will gather. Sears, delighted, explains that it is the perfect opportunity for the children to experience such an event for the first time. Her excitement contrasts sharply with Jamie's realization that his precious free time is about to come to an end. Later that night, Jamie dons his cloak and summons Black. Black clings to him as Jamie declares that it is time to visit the two blockheads. They make their way to town and enter Riza's house. Azard and Riza, seated at the table, immediately stand and greet Jamie, acknowledging his arrival. Jamie removes his hood and asks if they have completed his tasks. Riza apologizes, admitting they haven't learned anything about the Zenith religion yet, as it is a relatively new organization. Jamie concludes that even the members of Livel wouldn't be able to uncover much in a single day. Shifting his focus, Jamie asks about the other errand. Raiza points to a tied-up Pep and presents him as their catch. Pep looks at Jamie and recognizes his distinctive hair color, realizing that the Welton family might have taken control of the situation. Raiza informs Jamie that Pep is a member of Livel and notes that Han Ni intended to kill him, proving that Pep isn't an ordinary pawn. Azard adds that Pep claims to know nothing. Jamie decides to interrogate him and orders them to untie his mouth. As soon as the gag is removed, Pep begins pleading for his life, insisting he doesn't know anything. He promises to gather any information Jamie wants if spared. Jamie, unimpressed, calls Pep a child, causing Pep to feel a chill of fear. Jamie assures him that there is no reason to kill him, but he expects Pep to follow his orders. Overwhelmed by Jamie's immense power, Pep cries and swears to do anything Jamie wants, even offering to find his boss. Jamie silences Pep, noting that he is being too loud, and Pep realizes he is suddenly unable to speak. Jamie explains that Pep only needs to do one thing. Placing his hand on Pep's head, Jamie casts a spell, commanding him to go to the Count's estate and reveal everything about Livel's activities. Pep rises without protest and leaves the house, heading toward the estate. Azard and Raiza watch him go, and Jamie reassures them that Livel won't catch Pep and that his father will handle the situation first. He instructs his subordinates to leave the city and hide. The two bow and accept Jamie's orders without question. Jamie, curious, asks why they don't question him. They reply that the master's orders are absolute law and cannot be disobeyed. Black perches on Jamie's shoulder, watching as the scene unfolds. Raiza comments that he thinks he understands why Jamie has given them these instructions. Jamie recognizes that Raiza seems to grasp the situation they are in. He confirms Raiza's observation, thinking to himself that his father will likely destroy Livel. Jamie believes it won't benefit his father to know about the existence of these two subordinates during the destruction. Turning away, he informs them that he will be gone for a few days and instructs them to stay quiet until his return. They obey, and Jamie leaves the house. As Jamie walks away, Raiza runs after him, calling out. Jamie turns and asks what is wrong. Raiza, visibly concerned, questions what they have become. Acknowledging that he knows they are dead and beyond repair, Raiza admits he doesn't want to return to his past life. While he appreciates his newfound strength, he is desperate to understand what kind of creature he has become. Jamie asks for clarification, and Raiza expresses his suspicion that they might now be top-rank undead, given their extraordinary strength. Jamie, surprised by the question, laughs. Raiza, thinking he has asked something foolish, apologizes if it sounds stupid. Jamie reassures him with a smile that it isn't a stupid question, and explains that it is actually amusing. Most people, Jamie notes, would struggle with accepting their transformation into undead, but Raiza and Azard seem to have taken it in stride, which Jamie finds fascinating. Raiza thanks him, and Jamie reflects on how unique they are compared to others he has encountered. While most reject the idea of becoming monsters and lament their loss of humanity, these two are the opposite. Azard joins them outside, and Jamie observes that he has found reliable servants. He explains to them that they are just ordinary zombies, but he has preserved their appearances from before they died. Their transformation has enhanced their strength significantly, making them far more powerful than regular people. Raiza lowers his eyes, disheartened, and acknowledges that they are just ordinary zombies. Jamie laughs and encourages them, stating that everything depends on their efforts. He adds that one day, they might ascend to become zombies of the highest rank. This inspires the two, and they promise to hide as instructed and wait for his return. Jamie prepares to leave and Black squeals. Jamie tells Black not to call them pathetic, noting that he finds them intriguing and reminiscent of someone from his past. Concluding that they have stayed long enough, Jamie decides it is time to go back. That night, the Welton household is unusually restless. One member of Laval, the criminal organization in Hisa, decides to betray his own group, forcing the Count to stay behind to deal with the situation. As a result, only 3 members of the Welton family, Sears, Sarah, and Jamie, set off for Regan, the largest city in the east. Riding in a carriage, Jamie considers that he could have reached the city himself using his teleportation skill. Watching his mother with his sleeping sister, Jamie reflects on how much stronger he has become. Magic has advanced significantly since his time, becoming radically different. However, Jamie cannot determine how much time has passed since his death. He recalls historical accounts of events after his death, such as an army of demons attacking humans under the leadership of a demon lord. Though there have been no wars for several hundred years, Jamie concludes that a considerable amount of time must have elapsed. Dark magic begins to radiate from him as he thinks about the gods' inability to unite, something he finds advantageous for his goals. Dealing with them individually will be easier, even if it means countless people will die, something he no longer considers his concern. Sarah stirs slightly in her sleep, sensing the dark magic. Noticing this, Jamie quickly reins in his power. When his sister smiles in her sleep, Jamie resolves to focus on the upcoming ball first. The carriage rolls into the city, where the streets are adorned with well-maintained lawns near the houses and small market stalls. Nearby, a beautiful temple stands prominently. Jamie looks out of the carriage window and admires the view, commenting on how beautiful the city is. His mother responds enthusiastically, agreeing and pointing out that Regan is the most advanced city in their kingdom. She notes that no other place handles as much wealth as Regan does, marveling at its prosperity. Jamie agrees and thinks to himself that the city's reputation as one of the richest in the kingdom is well-deserved, thanks to Regan. When the carriage stops, the coachman informs them that they have arrived. Jamie expresses his excitement, saying he is so eager to meet Count Simon that it feels like his heart is about to leap out of his chest. His mother, finding his reaction adorable, hugs him and reassures him not to worry so much. Jamie wonders internally why he has to endure such situations, but his mother continues, commenting on how cute his excitement is and suggesting he hold her hand if he needs comfort. She finally lets him go and asks if Jamie admires Count Simon because he wants to become a magician himself. Jamie, feeling cornered, gives an exhausted yes as an answer. His mother praises Count Simon, describing him as incredible. She explains that Simon, the same age as Jamie's father, is already a 7th-grade mage and a leader of the kingdom's Eastern Council of Nobles, alongside Earl Welton. She adds that Simon is also known as the Red Lotus Magician because of his magic, which is said to be capable of killing 1,000 people with a single spell. Jamie asks what kind of person Count Simon is. His mother thinks for a moment before describing him as having hair as red as blood. Jamie, slightly surprised, reflects that he isn't interested in Simon's titles or reputation, but is intrigued by his strength and wants to speak with him. As the carriage enters the estate, Jamie wonders how his upcoming conversation with Count Simon will compare to his brief, somewhat unproductive dialogue with Marquis Linmull. When they arrive, Sears steps out of the carriage and instructs the children to follow her carefully. Jamie eagerly gets out of the carriage. A man who greets them asks Sears if she is the wife of Earl Welton, and she confirms. The man offers to escort them to their chambers. He leads them to luxurious rooms and informs them that these chambers are theirs for the duration of the event. He adds that they can make any request through their personal butler. Sears comments on how caring Count Simon is, and Jamie agrees, appreciating the thoughtfulness of having his own space. Jamie thinks about how he wouldn't have liked sharing a room with his parents. Sears instructs the children to return to her once they have settled their belongings. After a few minutes, a maid begins braiding Sears' hair and complimenting her on its smoothness and beauty. Jamie enters the room and is taken aback, commenting that his mother looks beautiful. Sears laughs and asks Jamie if he truly thinks so, and Jamie confirms, much to her delight. Overjoyed, she runs to him, exclaiming that he also looks very handsome that day. The maid quickly reminds Sears to control herself, warning that she might ruin her appearance. With tears in her eyes, Sears pleads to hug Jamie just once, but the maid refuses, explaining that her dress would wrinkle. Jamie sighs in relief at being spared, and another maid announces that Sarah, the young lady, is also ready. Sarah steps out wearing a cute dress, and their mother, Sears, exclaims with joy, praising how adorable she looks. Jamie looks at Sarah and compliments her, saying she looks like a doll. Sarah, delighted, asks if she is cute. Jamie assures her that she is very nice, but points out that the dress must be uncomfortable. He encourages her to be patient until the end of the event, and Sarah agrees. The maid then reminds Jamie that he also needs to change into appropriate attire. After everyone is ready, they head to the banquet hall, where the event is just beginning. Jamie looks around, marveling at the grandeur of the ballroom. He reflects on how luxurious it appears, wondering if ballrooms have always been this opulent. Sitting at the table, he asks if Count Simon really enjoys all this extravagance. Sears confirms that he does, and adds that Jamie will be even more surprised when he meets the Count in person. Other ladies in the hall notice Sears and greet her warmly, complimenting her beauty. One remarks on how elegant her dress is, noting that it is made from organic cotton grown on the Welton family's lands, and personally designed by Sears to be worn in winter. Sears gracefully thanks them for their kind words. Meanwhile, Jamie watches with distaste, recognizing their attempts to ingratiate themselves with the Welton family. He thinks about how such sycophants remind him of people from his past who flattered the gods. Despite his disgust, he is relieved that his mother knows how to handle such people. A man steps into the center of the hall and loudly calls for attention. Introducing himself as Rywal Banner, a member of Regan's administrative bodies, he welcomes everyone to Count Simon's ball. After a brief speech, he announces that the Count and his family will be arriving shortly and asks everyone to take their seats. Gesturing toward the entrance, the sound of footsteps fills the hall as the red-haired Count Simon makes his entrance. Jamie feels a wave of nervousness as he sees him. The Count greets everyone warmly, expressing his hope that they will enjoy the event. As the Count moves through the hall, Jamie carefully observes him, noting his powerful presence. Comparing him to Marquis Linmel, Jamie speculates that Count Simon might even be stronger. As Simon approaches their table, Jamie becomes even more intrigued, thinking that the Red Lotus magician exceeds his expectations. The Count, accompanied by his wife, approaches Sears from behind and greets her warmly, complimenting her appearance and noting how much better she looks than last year. Sears rises from her chair and thanks him, teasingly asking him not to bring up the past. She returns the sentiment, expressing gladness that he is in good health. Simon inquires about Count Welton's absence, and Sears explains that he will arrive later due to some pressing matters. The Count acknowledges this with understanding. Turning his attention to Jamie, Simon asks if this is her son. Sears confirms, introducing Jamie and Sarah as her children. She encourages them to greet the Count, and they promptly do so, introducing themselves with politeness. The Count's wife compliments their beauty, and Sears adds that her children are also very smart. The Count's wife laughs, acknowledging her words. Simon fixes his gaze on Jamie, scrutinizing him intently. Jamie realizes he is being assessed and, confident in his abilities, welcomes the scrutiny, even feeling eager to display his strength. Simon's lips curl into a subtle smile, and he addresses Jamie, confirming his name. Jamie smiles in response, affirming it. The Count then states that they will talk later, to which Jamie agrees. Simon moves on to greet other guests, leaving Jamie impressed. Jamie reflects that Count Simon has surpassed all his expectations and eagerly anticipates their next meeting. Everyone gathers to greet Count Simon, and his wife warmly encourages the Welton family to make themselves comfortable. One of the Count's sons frowns as he observes Jamie, who is asking his mother when his father will arrive. Sears replies that she expects him closer to midnight. The Count's family takes their seats at their table, and one of the boys asks his father what he thinks of Earl Welton's son. The Count, mildly amused, asks why a 10-year-old child interests him so much. His son explains that while Jamie is young now, he will one day lead the Welton family. Being of a similar age, it seems worthwhile to get to know him. The Count remains silent, contemplating. He has heard rumors about Jamie showing leadership qualities among noble children, and it appears his son seeks his approval by befriending Jamie. Finding this amusing, the Count decides to humor him and praises his son's foresight. His son, slightly pleased, presses further, asking if the Count can share more about Jamie. Instead, the Count deflects by suggesting they focus on the meal, and his son reluctantly agrees. As they eat, the Count's wife gently advises her son to get along with Jamie, emphasizing the long-standing alliance between their families. Her son assures her not to worry, and she smiles, satisfied with his response. Despite this outward compliance, the boy privately dismisses the idea of befriending Jamie, imagining a future where Jamie kneels before him, earning his father's approval. He pictures his father's proud hand on his shoulder, which fuels his ambition. Meanwhile, his older brother, silently observing the exchange, grins knowingly. As the banquet progresses, guests begin rising from their tables. Sears reminds Jamie to make friends with everyone. Jamie agrees outwardly, but privately thinks he doesn't need friends and will instead find a quiet place to spend his time. Excusing himself, he wanders into the estate's backyard and finds a luxurious garden with a gazebo and greenhouse. He admires the scenery, noting that Count Simon's wealth extends beyond magic, and hopes to meet him again soon. Suddenly, a voice interrupts his thoughts, asking whom he is talking to. Jamie instinctively casts a spell on his weapon and turns, pointing the tip of a magical spear at the girl standing behind him. Realizing she poses no threat, he withdraws his weapon just in time. The girl, startled, exclaims at his sudden attack. Jamie, unfazed, retorts that sneaking up on someone unannounced is equally questionable. The girl, offended, calls his actions rude, but Jamie coldly replies that she is lucky to be alive. She falls silent, and Jamie demands to know who she is and how she has managed to sneak up on him. Smiling coyly, the girl teases him, questioning whether she should reveal her identity after such behavior. Jamie finds her demeanor irritating, disliking her tone and the fact that she has managed to surprise him. He declares that he isn't in the mood to deal with her antics and, without warning, fires a magical air bullet between her legs, leaving a depression in the ground. The girl, frightened, stares at the damage. Jamie explains that the air bullet is second-level magic and can be fatal without proper magical defense. He warns her to be cautious before pushing him further. Terrified, the girl quickly introduces herself as Ash Valle, the eldest daughter of Viscount Valle and a spiritualist of spirits. Jamie recognizes the term spiritualist as referring to magicians who form contracts with nature spirits. Spiritualists are rare and highly regarded, often earning noble titles. Jamie reflects on how remarkable it is for someone his age to already be a spiritualist. Such individuals typically begin studying at 10 years old, but Ash seems to be a prodigy. When Ash demands to know who he is, Jamie notes her determination and dislike for losing. He introduces himself as Jamie Welton, heir to the Earl of Welton, and expresses his pleasure in meeting her. He thinks about the Val family's loyalty to his own, which adds significance to their meeting. Ash, surprised by his identity, hesitates to respond. Meanwhile, Earl Welton interrogates the leader of Livel, a criminal gang. Standing over the man, the Count expresses his disgust at their involvement in human trafficking. He notes that while the gang has been useful at times, this betrayal is unforgivable. As the man begs for mercy, coughing up blood, the Count coldly ignores his pleas. Declaring that only a madman or someone tired of living would commit such an act, he orders the leader to be hanged the next day. The guards carry out his orders, and the Count instructs his men to prepare a carriage for his departure to Reagan. As the prisoners are escorted away, a hooded man watches from a tree. Taking out a magic sphere, he reports that the gang has failed and issues instructions to proceed with Plan B. Jamie wanders through the garden, noticing Ash following him closely. He abruptly stops, turns to her, and demands to know why she is trailing him. He dismisses her, saying that her father being his father's vassal means nothing. Ash lowers her eyes, hesitates, and begins to speak. But Jamie cuts her off, telling her to stop speaking so cryptically. He announces that he is heading back and instructs her not to follow. However, Ash grabs his hand, prompting an annoyed Jamie to question if she is serious. He turns back to her and asks why she keeps pestering him. Ash replies that she has never met someone her own age before and wants to be his friend. Jamie, surprised, silently processes her reasoning. He thinks it strange, considering he has never imagined such a motive. To him, friends are unnecessary. He reasons that while friends might be important for someone like her, it isn't his concern. Walking away, he tells her to find someone else, repeating that he doesn't need friends. Ash calls after him, frustrated, and shouts that he is a pest before finally leaving him alone. Jamie reflects on her words, reaffirming to himself that he doesn't need friends. He thinks she doesn't understand that friendship, like any other relationship, is irrational. Memories from his past resurface, angering him as he blames her for reminding him of something unpleasant. Lost in his thoughts, Jamie is suddenly interrupted by someone calling out to him. Turning, he sees a red-haired boy with a group of friends. Jamie instantly recognizes him as the son of Count Simon. The boy addresses Jamie, but Jamie's curt reply surprises him. One of the boys in the group questions Jamie's disrespectful tone, and another identifies the red-haired boy as Alf, the eldest son and heir of the Simon family. Jamie dismisses them as noisy, raising his index finger and casting a silencing spell. The group falls silent, unable to utter a word. Alf, nervous, asks if Jamie has just used a silencing spell on them. Jamie smirks and acknowledges that Alf recognizes the spell, remarking that Alf is slightly better than his companions, whom he calls monkeys. Alf, irritated, calls Jamie smug and reminds him that he is older. Jamie retorts that Alf should get straight to the point before he silences him as well. Waving his hand lightly, Jamie causes Alf to cough into his fist. Regaining his composure, Alf smiles and assures Jamie he isn't looking for a fight, but merely wants to chat. He compliments Jamie, marveling at his ability to use silent spells, which he describes as incredible. Jamie abruptly asks who Alf is, dismissing Alf's words as useless chatter. He instructs him to leave. Alf, taken aback, asks if Jamie truly doesn't know who he is. Jamie replies that he is well aware Alf is the son of Count Simon. Slightly reassured, Alf says he is glad Jamie knows, as he had almost been disappointed. He suggests that since they are both heirs to noble houses, they should have no communication issues. Jamie silently observes Alf, thinking that if he hadn't demonstrated his magical skills, Alf and his friends might have tried to force friendship upon him. Alf continues, stating that since they are destined to become central figures among the nobility of the eastern region, it makes sense to establish a friendship now. Jamie understands Alf's intentions clearly. He wants to dominate him. Sighing, Jamie thinks about how tiresome it is to listen to such pitiful attempts. He firmly replies that he isn't interested in Alf, his ideas, or even continuing the conversation. He tells Alf to leave, as there is nothing more to discuss. Alf, taken aback by the rejection, asks angrily if Jamie has just refused him. The blatant refusal irritates him. Drawing his magic staff, Alf declares his intention to crush Jamie's magic and force him into submission. Smiling confidently, he points his staff at Jamie and awaits his response. Jamie chuckles, noting that Alf has intended to use brute force all along. Alf admits as much, explaining that he adjusted his approach after witnessing Jamie's magical abilities, but is now reverting to his usual tactics. Jamie's expression darkens with disgust at Alf's duplicity, especially at such a young age. He questions Alf's assumption that adults will allow him to act recklessly, pointing out that Alf will surely face consequences if anything serious happens. Alf dismisses Jamie's concerns, confidently asserting that no one will see them. He reveals a magical pearl, crushes it, and envelops the area in a magical barrier. Jamie recognizes it as a magical artifact of illusion, which Alf confirms before threatening that Jamie will soon be begging for mercy. Alf dispels Jamie's silencing spell, and his friends gasp for air. One of the boys expresses relief, saying he thought he was going to die under the spell. Another angrily accuses Jamie of arrogance, thinking he can get away with anything because of his family name. Jamie observes the artifact's magic dome and thinks it is a clever tool. Ignoring their threats, he finds their arrogance amusing. One of the boys, frustrated by Jamie's silence, shouts that there will be no mercy. Jamie, unfazed, remarks on how interesting the situation is. Alf, assuming Jamie is oblivious to the gravity of his predicament, begins to make a grand statement about the Welton family, but is abruptly interrupted when Jamie casts a spell. Jamie simply tells them to suffer. Blood flows from their eyes and mouths as they writhe in agony. Jamie warns them not to disable the artifact, smiling as he adds that if they do, everyone will witness their torment. The boys scream in pain, and after a while, the spell ends. Jamie has already left, leaving them to recover from their ordeal. As the boys regain their senses, one pleads for help, and another complains of an unbearable headache. Alf stands up shakily, vomiting and coughing as he spits out drool. Overwhelmed, he thinks about how close he has been to death. Realizing Jamie's superior strength, he laments his own weakness. He acknowledges that Jamie is a 4th-rank mage while he is only a 2nd-rank mage, which makes him feel utterly inadequate. Tears stream down Alf's face as he questions why things have turned out this way. He wonders how someone from the Welton family, known for their swordsmanship, can possess such extraordinary magical talent. Consumed by jealousy, Alf resolves to crush Jamie's abilities and ensure he will never wield magic again. Slowly rising to his feet, Alf vows that he won't forgive Jamie and will make him pay for this humiliation. The boys return to the estate after their encounter with Jamie. One of Alf's friends nervously asks if using the magical artifact was truly the right decision, given its dangerous nature. Alf dismisses his concerns, telling him to stay quiet and follow along. Suddenly, Alf's younger brother Lennon calls out to him. Turning toward Lennon, Alf asks why he is there. Lennon smirks and replies that his presence should make Alf happy. He reveals another artifact, stating that no younger brother could stay calm after hearing his elder sibling had been humiliated. Alf is taken aback and asks how Lennon has acquired such a dangerous item. Lennon evades the question, handing over the artifact and encouraging Alf to teach Jamie a lesson. Alf grins, agreeing that its origins don't matter. What matters is using it to destroy Jamie. Clutching the artifact, Alf resolves to exact his revenge. Later that evening, Count Welton arrives at the estate. Count Simon personally greets him with a smile, shaking his hand. Count Welton jokes about the personal greeting, asking if the sun will soon rise in the west. The two exchange pleasantries before heading to the reception area. As they settle in, Count Welton inquires about the success of the event. Count Simon casually mentions meeting Welton's son, prompting the Earl to ask for his opinion of Jamie. Simon remarks on Jamie's quick response and comments that it is clear Welton dotes on his children. Count Welton laughs, admitting that he lives for his children. Simon, looking wistful, says he envies him. Sensing a deeper meaning, Count Welton asks if Simon's circumstances remain unchanged. Avoiding the question, Simon shifts the topic, expressing his amazement at Jamie's talents. Welton, seeing through Simon's vague statements, smiles and asks if Simon believes Jamie to be exceptionally talented. Simon clarifies that talent isn't sufficient to describe Jamie. He declares Jamie the most gifted individual he's ever encountered, possibly in all of human history. Count Welton removes his gloves, recalling that Marquis Linmel has expressed a similar sentiment. Simon, intrigued, asks how Marquis met Jamie. Welton explains that he has known of Jamie's potential early on, but hadn't considered it extraordinary. Seeking guidance, he had approached Marquis to mentor Jamie. However, Marquis had refused. Simon sympathizes, stating that Jamie's unparalleled genius makes him capable of achieving greatness on his own. He speculates that Jamie might even ascend to the legendary rank of ninth-grade magician, surpassing all others. Leaning forward slightly, Count Welton calls out to Simon, concerned by his words. Simon raises a hand, his expression serious. He speaks of humanity's fragility compared to dragons, high elves, and other beings, noting that human magic pales in comparison. However, he wonders what would happen if a magician of the ninth rank emerges, someone who could rival or even surpass these powerful creatures. Simon's dream is for humanity to rise as the dominant force in the world, unbound by its current limitations. Count Welton calls Simon's vision arrogant. Simon acknowledges it, but justifies his aspirations, referencing a forgotten history that has been erased from the continent. 10,000 years ago, a great calamity wiped out humanity's progress, leaving behind only fragments of its past. Simon's dream is for humanity to regain that lost power, ensuring its civilization never faces erasure again. After a reflective silence, Simon urges Welton to rest, noting the late hour. Count Welton agrees and retires for the night. Meanwhile, Jamie sleeps soundly in his bed, and his father quietly approaches, pondering the weight of the expectations placed on Jamie. As a father, he resolves to support Jamie wholeheartedly, praying for him to grow into a fair and just man. The next morning, everyone gathers in the banquet hall. Jamie, seated at the table, wonders what has been troubling his father the previous night. He dismisses the thought, knowing his current magical ability doesn't yet allow him to probe deeper. Suddenly, Ash calls out to him. Jamie, weary of her persistence, reminds her that he has nothing to do with her. Ash laughs, undeterred, and calls over her sister. Jamie observes with irritation, thinking she is simply increasing the number of annoying people around him. Rising from his seat, he declares he has no intention of associating with her and begins to leave. Ash protests, urging him to at least meet her sister since their families are close. Her sister, Rebecca, approaches and scolds Jamie for his rudeness, emphasizing the importance of formalities when addressing the Count's son. At the sound of Rebecca's voice, Jamie freezes and turns toward her. Ash teases him, asking if he has a crush on her sister, boasting that Rebecca is a true beauty. Jamie, stunned, recognizes Rebecca as the love of his life, the one who had been taken by the gods for her own good. He is overwhelmed by her sudden appearance as a child, thinking that this moment marks the beginning of his transformation into Diablo Volfir, a being devoid of emotions. As Jamie processes his thoughts, Alf approaches from the side. Spotting Jamie, he declares with anger that he is dead. Jamie looks at Rebecca in shock, calling her Jane. Meanwhile, Rebecca looks surprised, but she eventually responds to the name. Thereafter, Jamie and Rebecca stare at each other in disbelief, while Ash, standing between them, looks at them with a surprised face, wondering if Jamie has really fallen in love with her sister. At the same time, Alf casts a sly glance at Jamie and says with a smile that he has finally found him. After this, he frowns sharply, activating a stream of fire and furiously ordering Jamie to call him boss. During this, Rebecca quickly makes a run for Ash, worried for her safety, while Jamie stands in front of Ash. Suddenly, Jamie demands that everyone stay out of the way, and the flame begins to dissipate. Alf is then left with an artifact that he tightly clutches in his hand, realizing that his attack has been made useless right in front of his eyes. Meanwhile, Rebecca hugs the shocked Ash tightly, and the rest of the room watches in shock as they realize that Jamie has just stopped the 6th-class Phoenix race that was created by Alf's father. In response, Jamie casts a fearsome glance at Alf, activating streams of mana in his outstretched hand and wishing him dead. Ice begins to cover Alf's shoulder, and he watches in shock as it spreads further onto his head, wrapping around his hand. Confused, Alf has no idea what's going on, and he is not even able to do anything about this. But watch the ice spread, leaving only one eye visible as he lets out a loud, heart-rending scream. Jamie looks with a killer intent at Alf, continuing to use his magic, but is surprised when another hand appears in front of his face. Count Argino stands behind him with a serious look, holding his palm in front of Jamie's face, stopping his spell. Meanwhile, the two concerned Vale sisters clutch each other in an embrace and watch Jamie with worry. Argino does not remove his hand, and Jamie closes his eyes. Count Argino kneels, holding Jamie in his arms, while Count Simon stands opposite with his hands behind his back. At the same time, Argino watches Jamie with concern, pondering the gravity of the incident. Argino recalls that when he noticed the altercation between the children, he thought it was just a misunderstanding. However, remembering how Alf gradually became encased in ice, he concludes that this definitely did not happen by mistake, and that if he had not intervened, the boy would have died. Now, Simon stands opposite Argino, holding his child, and reflects with admiration on the situation. He is amazed at how Jamie was able to dispel the magic of the Phoenix race and prevent the ballroom from turning into a blazing inferno. Count Simon gazes at the young genius with an insidious look, dreaming that Jamie will one day reach the 9th grade and fulfill his plans. Behind Simon, his wife sits on the floor with Alf in an unconscious state, screaming loudly that Jamie has harmed their son and demanding punishment for him. Sears immediately stands up for her son and reminds the Countess that Alf tried to attack first. She recalls how the boy directed a stream of fire at Jamie and was the first one to throw an insult, which started the quarrel. Frowning and clenching her fists, Sears asks Alf's mother if that was how it all happened. The Countess begins to scream furiously, trying to defend her son, but is unable to finish her sentence. Sears, looking menacingly at the woman, asks her to finish that sentence. Seeing that the situation is only escalating, Argino hastens to calm Sears down, carrying her son away in his arms. Meanwhile, Countess Simon sits, lost, with Alf in her arms, catching a series of disrespectful glances. She turns to her husband, standing to the side, for support, and he slowly begins to turn around. The Countess is delighted, thinking that her husband will stand up for their son. However, her expectations are crushed when Count Simon does the opposite and accepts that their son made a mistake. Count Simon then apologizes to Sears with a serious face, while his wife looks at him in disbelief. Meanwhile, the people in the hall surround the two families, watching how the situation will be resolved. In response, Countess Simon, accepting the apology, and announces that they will leave the hall immediately. The alarmed Count Simon turns to Argeno, who still holds Jaime in his arms, inviting him to rest as well. After this, Count Simon loudly addresses all those gathered, asking for forgiveness for the chaos that arose at the ball and announcing the end of the event, encouraging them to go and have a rest as well. Meanwhile, the helpless Countess Simon silently looks at her husband as the crowd disperses, emptying the ballroom. She then gazes at him, watching as he sees off the guests with a smile, unable to understand how he could act so composedly. Still crying, the Countess screams and reminds her husband that Alf is their son. As she continues to scream, blaming Jaime for everything, Count Simon glances at her angrily and rudely demands that she shut up. As a result, Countess Simon's eyes widen, shocked by his tone, as he orders her to take Alf and leave the hall. Later during the night in the city of Regan, a bright moon rises over the estate. Meanwhile, the displeased voice of Count Simon can be heard in the room as he turns to Alf, asking if he wants to attract his attention. His wife watches pityingly from the side as Simon looks intently at his son, menacingly demanding an answer. Alf shakes with fear as his father talks about the dire consequences his rash actions could have had. Trembling, the boy begins to cry. Count Simon then gives Alf a menacing look as he explains that Jaime was indeed impudent, but asks in surprise who gave Alf the Phoenix artifact. Opening his eyes in surprise, Count Simon angrily questions Alf, watching him, and realizes that his son is very afraid to confess. Continuing to look menacingly at Alf, the Count reminds him that he does not like to repeat himself. Alf looks at his father in fear, his tears flowing more and more as he stutters out the name, Lennon. Later, a red-haired teenager stands at the open door to his father's wooden office. Lennon frowns, watching Alf with displeasure, concluding that his crying older brother is pathetic because he practically handed him a solution to the problem. Deciding to feign innocence, Lennon closes his eyes and smiles as he addresses his father. Count Simon asks his youngest son if he gave his brother the artifact, to which Lennon gives a short, affirmative answer. In response, Count Simon frowns, questioning why Lennon would give Alf something so dangerous. Lennon then places his hand on his chin and, with a thoughtful look, declares that he was confident Alf would lose to that kid and simply did not want to see his brother fail. Just as he is about to finish his sentence, Simon tells Lennon that's not the case. Lennon then freezes in shock when his father tells him that he is merely manipulating his older brother. Having uttered these words, the Count looks furiously at his youngest son. He repeats to Lennon, telling him that he didn't want to do it for his brother, rather he just wanted to manipulate him. Meanwhile, Lennon, very embarrassed and taken aback, does not understand how his father found out. Alf, hearing his father's words, looks questioningly at his younger brother. Standing between his two sons and shaking his head, Count Simon admits that he has no interest in either of them. Looking to the side, he asks them if they want to know the reason. Alf and Lennon stare in shock at their father, who admits that he does not like his own children due to their lack of outstanding abilities. Count Simon then continues by deciding to tell them a way to gain his attention. Count Simon continues, explaining that they need to prove their blood relationship through their actions. Approaching the door and lowering the handle, Count Simon finally says that his sons must eliminate the consequences of their actions. Looking back, Simon adds that tomorrow, both Alf and Lennon will apologize to Jamie until he forgives them. Alf and Lennon silently watch as the door slams shut after their father leaves the room. Scratching his head, Alf asks Lennon if he intends to apologize to Jamie. Meanwhile, Lennon stands there, seemingly shocked by the words of his father as Alf looks at him. The Count's phrase about proving that they share his blood echoes in Lennon's mind. Standing with his eyes wide open, he clenches his fists and, grinning maliciously, promises that he will definitely prove it. Meanwhile, Sears stands at Jamie's bedside, looking at her son with concern. The woman examines the calm face of Jamie, now lying unconscious in his bed. Sears wonders in shock what could have happened to cause her child to try to kill Alf. At first, she thought it was just childish pranks, but she realizes that if the artifact had worked as intended, something terrible could have happened. Clenching her fist, Sears decides she cannot forgive Alf's prank, despite the Count's apologies. She vows to herself that she needs a better apology to compensation, even if she has to go to her family for their help. However, suddenly Sears shyly covers her face with her hands, stopping the terrible thoughts of retribution, realizing that she is not thinking straight right now. Just then, a hand falls on her shoulder, and she looks up in surprise to see Argino approaching. He asks with concern if she is okay. Sears turns her gaze to Argino embracing her from behind. She then clarifies that she has no reason to not be okay. Realizing that Sears is definitely concerned, Argino asks her what she would like for him to do. But Sears reminds Argino that he stopped her when all was happening. In response, Argino tells her that he is only offering this to not make her mood worse even more. Shaking her head, Sears says that Count Simon has already deeply apologized, so she does not wish for this incident to spark conflict between the western and eastern regions. The couple feels relieved, thinking that Alf was scolded appropriately for his offense. Argino then comments how Alf's face had a visible frightened expression. Meanwhile, Jamie, lying completely under the covers, stirs as his parents leave the bedroom to let him get some sleep. He peeks his head out and, with an indifferent face, concludes that he understands his parents' feelings, realizing he couldn't control himself at that moment. Sitting up abruptly, Jamie closes his eyes, and his thoughts become filled with Jane. He remembers the beautiful Rebecca, the reincarnation of his beloved. Sitting on the bed under the blanket, Jamie reflects that Jane's reincarnation is natural, as he too was reborn after tens of thousands of years. The boy calmly concludes that, unlike him, Jane has no memories of her past life. Looking down in puzzlement, Jamie tries to understand how he and Jane have been reborn in the same period. The gears in his mind turn intensely as he wonders whether this is merely an irony of fate or someone's deliberate plan, perhaps a plan of the 12 gods. Suddenly, Black appears next to Jamie, squealing and rubbing himself against Jamie's cheek. Black then finally settles on the boy's shoulder, and Jamie, closing his eyes with a smile, dismisses the thought of the gods. Stretching, Jamie looks at Black and wonders what he was even thinking about. Jamie tries to keep his thoughts calm and collected, but fails to do so as the image of Jane's death flashes before his eyes. She appears to have clutched her stomach, where blood flowed non-stop. Sadly closing his eyes, Jamie feels as though nuts and gears are falling out of place, and he concludes that he must meet Rebecca again. The scene then shifts to a dark room where an unknown man, dressed in a robe, ties a message to the leg of a dove and reflects on changes in the magical society. Attached to the bird's leg is a white note that reads, "The firstborn of Earl Welton, named Jamie, at 9 years old, is an amazing magical genius." The man proceeds to step outside and releases several doves with messages, waving his arms as daylight breaks. Meanwhile, Jamie walks along the garden path, heading toward a pond edged with stones. Here, Jamie appears completely saddened. Black, who is perched on Jamie's shoulder, looks at him with concern but squeaks in delight, enjoying the gusts of wind. Jamie, looking at Black in confusion, asks how he knows what freshness is. Black then responds to Jamie, prompting him to assure Black that he understands. Standing with his eyes closed in the middle of the garden, Jamie cherishes the silence, realizing that it is probably because of the people that have left, since it is the last day. He then resumes his walk, thinking that he has to see Rebecca again before he returns. Suddenly, Jamie freezes, stunned as he clearly hears raindrops. Turning around, he tries to locate the source of the sound, looking from side to side in worry, but is unable to find it. He then forms a seal with his hands, expanding his mana radius width. At last, Jamie finally manages to locate the source. Wasting no time, he quickly rushes toward it, but his intense run ends in him getting exhausted. There, he spots Rebecca sitting on the path with her back to him, making a promise with an aquatic creature, a tailed girl, Undine, whose body is woven from water, hovers in the air. The water spirit watches as Rebecca creates a ball of water on her outstretched palms. Hearing footsteps, the concerned Rebecca turns around and notices Jamie. She immediately rushes to him, asking about his health. Taken aback, Jamie replies that he's fine. He looks at her, slightly flustered, trying to convey something he can't quite express. Closing her eyes briefly, Rebecca introduces herself again, explaining that she's a water elementalist. Hearing this, Jamie understands that both this version of Rebecca and the version from his previous life are water elementalists. However, Jamie does not understand why this is the case. Just then, Jane's voice echoes through Jamie's ears, requesting him not to forget her ever. Taken aback, Jamie continues to look ahead, lost in thought, not reacting to Rebecca's voice. Rebecca then asks why Jamie looks sad. Jamie remains silent, and Rebecca thinks he might not have gotten over the events of the previous day. She approaches him and hugs him, reassuring him that everything will be fine. Jamie considers that this feeling is merely a remnant from his past, but decides it wouldn't hurt to enjoy the moment a little longer. They sit down together by the water, and Rebecca asks if he is feeling better. Jamie thanks her, and she smiles, explaining that her father taught her that difficulties are easier to overcome when shared with someone. Jamie asks if she means Viscount Valley. Rebecca confirms it, adding that she regrets not being able to talk properly the day before, and is glad for the opportunity now. Jamie agrees, saying he has the same thought. She smiles brightly, and asks if he is sincere. Jamie confirms it again and reflects that she seems like a completely different person now, perhaps for the better. He mentions hearing about her family's tradition of making contracts with air spirits and asks if it is true. Rebecca explains that she had wanted to make a contract with them but had been unsuccessful. Despite her strong connection to the spirits, they always refused her and left. However, one day, the spirit Undine appeared to her, saying it was her destiny to form a contract with her. She admits it was an important decision she should have discussed with her father, but she had impulsively signed the contract on the spot. Jamie thinks to himself that the Spirit King must have known. A contract with the King of Spirits is different from any other. It is a soul-binding agreement. He realizes that when Jane's soul was reborn in Rebecca's body, the Spirit King must have immediately recognized her. Jamie asks if her father punished her for this. Rebecca replies that he wasn't angry, though he did seem a little upset, just like she had been. Jamie reassures her, saying that what happened was something special. He remarks on how rare it is for an elemental to independently offer a contract, even though she hadn't formed a contract with the spirit of air. Being chosen by the water elemental is an incredible honor. He encourages her to believe in herself. Rebecca is surprised but deeply touched by his words, smiling widely and thanking him. Jamie stands up and expresses his gratitude for the day, saying he has to leave. Rebecca calls after him, saying they will see each other again. She sighs, wishing they could have talked more. Her face flushes red as she wonders what these newfound feelings could mean. Meanwhile, Jamie walks back toward the estate, questioning whether he had been too formal. Black squeaks inquisitively, and Jamie asks if children don't usually speak like that. He admits it is difficult for him to talk to Rebecca like a child, as she seems more mature. Black squeaks persistently, and Jamie snaps at him to be quiet. After some time, Jamie returns to the estate, only to be called by Alf. He turns and sees the two Simon brothers behind him. Jamie asks what they want. Alf awkwardly scratches the back of his head before sharply asking for forgiveness. Jamie, surprised, immediately understands and asks with a smirk if their father forced him to apologize. Alf looks uncomfortable, and Jamie remarks that everything is clear. Turning to Lennon, he asks what he is doing there. Alf explains that Lennon came along with him. Jamie accuses Alf of being too scared to come and apologize alone. Lennon admits he is the one who gave Alf the artifact. Jamie's anger flares, and he questions whether the brothers conspired to kill him together. He asks Lennon for his name. Lennon introduces himself as Lennon Simon. Jamie observes Lennon's aura and realizes he is much more talented than Alf. He deduces that even such a promising son isn't enough for Count Simon. Lennon nonchalantly remarks that it's good nothing terrible happened and asks if they can leave now that they have apologized. Jamie, irritated, thinks Lennon is trying to make a fool of him. He decides he can't let Lennon go unpunished, as it would eventually come back to haunt him. With a sigh, he says it must be difficult for Lennon in the fight for inheritance. Alf, confused, demands to know what Jamie means. Jamie ignores him and asks Lennon if he is correct. Lennon, visibly scared, remains silent. Jamie places a hand on Lennon's shoulder, stating that he should face consequences for his actions. Before Lennon can react, Jamie uses his magic. Lennon finds himself enveloped in darkness. He rubs his hands together, feeling a chilling cold, and kneels down, overwhelmed by fear. A voice echoes, telling him it is his last chance. The darkness lifts, and Lennon realizes it was an illusion, but the terror lingers. He clutches his head, sobbing, as Alf calls out to him in concern. Lennon, trembling, looks at Jamie and thinks about the gravity of his situation. Realizing his only option, Lennon lowers his head and begs for forgiveness. The day of departure arrives. Carriages line up at the estate, and Jamie steps outside, relieved at the thought of going home. He reflects on how tired he is of constantly going out and how much he prefers staying at home, even if it means being squeezed by his mother. Shaking his head, he smiles and dismisses his thoughts, wondering what he's even thinking about. Count Simon approaches him, commenting that he seems to be in a good mood. Jamie turns to him and replies that while he's not exactly in a great mood, he's glad to be heading home soon. The Count smiles, expressing regret that they haven't had the chance to communicate properly. Jamie shares the sentiment but adds that his desire to return home outweighs everything else since he's completely exhausted. He suggests the Count likely knows why. The Count, taken aback for a moment, laughs and acknowledges that the magical world has started to pay attention to Jamie. Jamie remarks that it's something he expected, and the Count laughs again, impressed by Jamie's awareness of his potential. Jamie confirms he understands it well. As they walk together, Jamie brings up Lennon, mentioning that he taught him a lesson. The Count admits noticing a change in Lennon since the previous day. Jamie asks if the Count is angry about what happened. The Count replies that these are the consequences of Lennon's decisions, so there's no reason to be angry. Jamie notes that Lennon seems quite talented and suggests the Count should train him. The Count dismisses the idea, asserting that he knows more about Lennon's abilities than anyone else and finds them insignificant. Jamie, smiling nervously, argues that without trying, they wouldn't know Lennon's full potential. He points out that under such pressure, Lennon can't show his talent and blames the Count for the situation. The Count is surprised by Jamie's bluntness. Jamie elaborates that while Alf is ordinary, Lennon has significant potential. The Count questions whether he's underestimated Alf. Thinking to himself, he's amazed that this child, Jamie, seems to have insight into a talent even an 8th-rank magician failed to notice. It feels as though he's standing before a great magician. Jamie suggests that by helping Lennon, the Count might discover unexpected growth in himself. The Count is again surprised but wants to ask more, only for Sears to call out to Jamie, announcing that it's time to leave. Jamie waves at the Count, dismissing his words as those of a foolish child, and runs to the carriage. The Count watches him leave, his eyes sparkling as he closes them, and mutters that everything is as expected. Time passes since the ball at Count Simon's estate. Jamie stands in a forest clearing, leaning on a stone and waiting. Black notices movement and squeaks to alert him. The bushes rustle, and Jamie impatiently urges whoever's coming to hurry. Riza and Azard emerge from the bushes, and Jamie scolds them for being late. Riza blames Azard, and Azard apologizes, but Jamie dismisses the matter and tells them to focus on reporting what they've learned. Riza explains that the Zenith Church has been performing charitable work in Hiesa by providing food and shelter to those in need, creating a positive impression. They've even opened an orphanage. Jamie asks when the church started its activities. Riza responds that it's been shortly after the rebel gang was defeated. 2 months earlier, Count Welton destroyed the gang, and soon after, the Zenith Church began its official operations, aiding the poor and preaching the will of God. Initially, people paid little attention, but over time, the church gains immense popularity, with many becoming believers and respecting the church as the most revered institution in Hisa. Jamie reacts sharply, expressing disbelief that Zenith would engage in genuine charity. Concerned, he asks his subordinates if they think war and peace can coexist. They agree it's not possible, but Riza adds that they're interconnected. Jamie acknowledges this and explains that Zenith thrives on conflict. He believes the seemingly benevolent actions of Zenith's priests contradict the god's nature and suspects a hidden agenda behind their activities. He orders Riza and Azard to investigate further. They assure him it will be done, and Jamie resolves to uncover Zenith's plans. The following morning, in the Zenith Church's shelter, a priest praises Ricky for his hard work. Ricky humbly replies that it's nothing compared to the hardships he endured before. The priest smiles and reassures Ricky that he no longer needs to worry about his past. Ricky reflects on how the shelter transformed his and his sister's lives. Without it, they would have been doomed. He returns to his room, and his blind sister, Anna, greets him. Ricky looks at her and thinks about their tragic past, how their parents abandoned them because of Anna's blindness, and how he did terrible things to protect her on the streets. Life had been hopeless until the church extended its hand to them, giving them a second chance. Ricky feels grateful and aspires to become a priest to spread the miracles he experienced. Later, Ricky and others go outside, where a boy runs up to them excitedly, asking if they've heard the news. Ricky asks what he's referring to, and the boy explains that Shino, another resident of the shelter, received a divine blessing and is going to become a priest. Ricky is astonished and asks if it's true that Shino will become a priest. Time passes. Jamie flies over the night city, telling Black that they're almost at their destination, and it's time to descend. As they descend, he notices a blonde young man lying on the road below. Landing beside him, Jamie observes the young man's energy and concludes it feels both vile and divine. Clearly, the man is a priest. Spotting the blade on the young man's belt, Jamie deduces he's a high-ranking servant, which he finds troublesome. He wonders why a holy knight is lying in the middle of the road, suspecting it could spell trouble. Placing his foot on the young man's head, he debates ending the man's life. Suddenly, the young man grabs Jamie's leg, startling him. The exhausted man tries to speak, but Jamie can't understand him. The young man repeats part of a word before loudly exclaiming that he is hungry, and then loses consciousness. Jamie, annoyed, considers leaving the man there to starve. Irritated at being startled, he decides to leave, grounding himself and telling Black to follow. The next morning, Jamie arrives at breakfast, and seeing the fair-haired young man at the table, forces a smile while internally questioning why he's there. The young man, eating a bun, introduces himself and expresses relief at meeting Jamie. Jamie wonders why this bothersome person is eating at the same table as his family. The young man laughs and mentions that if it hadn't been for the Count's help, he would have died of hunger on the pavement. Argino clarifies that he had no personal role in saving him and credits the guards for bringing the young man to safety. The young man graciously replies that since the guards are under the Count's command, the Count deserves thanks. The Count laughs, asking if it's normal for a Knight of Light to die of hunger. The young man smiles and explains that this situation is unusual, as even high-ranking knights are still human and can only last longer without food compared to ordinary people. Jamie, uncomfortable with the situation, feeds strawberries to his sister while questioning why his parents are treating the young man so kindly. The Count asks the young man to confirm if he serves the Church of Pyro. The young man affirms, saying he serves Pyro, the goddess of mercy and punishment. The Count turns to Sears, remarking on how surprised she must have been to hear this. Sears admits she was indeed surprised. Noticing her reaction, the young man asks if there's something unusual about it. Sears inquires if he's ever heard of Bishop Saphira. The young man asks if she's referring to someone from Afton, and Sears clarifies that she's from the Bell family. The young man, visibly surprised, rises from his chair, kneels before her, and expresses his greetings. Jamie, taken aback by this display, questions what's happening. He knows the Church of Pyro is located in Afton, within Bell family territory, but he doesn't think this is enough reason for such reverence. He deduces that someone greeted with such formality by a knight must hold at least the rank of bishop. He asks his parents why the young man is addressing his mother in this manner. His father responds with a laugh, saying it's a long story that can be told another time. Feeling frustrated, Jamie sarcastically remarks that this is wonderful. Upset by the lack of explanation, he feels humiliated, while his sister waves at him and comments on how cute he looks. Jamie can't believe it. The situation doesn't turn out as planned, and he feels humiliated. He thinks about the close ties between the Bell family and the Pyro Church, seeing it as a potential obstacle since he might have to deal with this family in the future. Time passes, and the Count and the young man enter the living room. The Count asks how the young man ended up in the eastern region, noting that the Pyro Church has no official business there. He speculates whether the young man is there to expand the church's influence. The young man, flustered, waves his hands and assures him that's not the case. He explains that he has been pursuing someone and unintentionally ended up there. The Count inquires further, asking who the young man is pursuing. The young man sighs and reveals that he is after someone engaged in forbidden and cruel experiments, specifically the creator of chimeras. Argino is shocked and asks if the creator of chimeras is in Hisa. He presses further, asking the identity of this individual. The young man, hesitant, apologizes and explains that the information is highly confidential, known only to a select few within the church. However, he offers to share more details if the Count agrees to a contract and assists him. The Count asks if the young man is requesting his help. The young man confirms this and expresses confidence that having the Swordmaster's support would greatly advance his mission. Argino contemplates the gravity of the situation. He knows that chimeras are constructed from various creatures, but that their creators are regarded as the worst kind of criminals because the core of a chimera is often human. While theoretically, there could be chimeras made without humans, there are no historical examples to support this. Argino responds carefully, saying he can't promise full support, but acknowledges the close relationship between his family and the Pyro Church, which makes it difficult for him to ignore the situation entirely. The young man is thrilled and asks if this means he will help. The Count smiles and confirms his willingness to assist. Overcome with joy, the young man jumps from the sofa, thanking the Count profusely. Argino tells him to calm down and asks why the church is handling the pursuit of chimera creators independently, rather than seeking the kingdom's help. The young man explains that while the kingdom would likely assist, such an action would diminish the church's authority. He reveals a chilling detail, that the creator of the chimeras has kidnapped more than 10 goddess knights. The Count grows tense as the young man adds that the chimeras being created are imbued with divine powers. Meanwhile, Jamie strolls through the garden, reflecting on how much he has come to look forward to tea. He approaches the gazebo, where his mother greets him, urging him to sit down quickly. Once seated, she pours him tea. As Jamie sips, his mother asks what he wants to know so urgently. Jamie, still curious, inquires about the young man from earlier and why he had bowed so reverently to her. He wonders why someone would show such deep respect to a person they have just met. His mother smiles knowingly and says she has anticipated this question. She acknowledges his curiosity about the Bell family's connection to the Pyro Church. She then reveals that Jamie's great-grandfather, her own grandfather, whom Jamie has never met, is regarded as the savior of the Pyro Church. Jamie is astonished, struggling to process the fact that his mother's grandfather played such a significant role in the Pyro Church's history. Sears explains that in the past, when a very important item is stolen from the Pyro Church, her grandfather steps in to help. It happens during an incident at the Portmouth Garden, where the Demon King's followers attempt to use a sacred relic to summon their lord. Fortunately, their efforts fail. Jamie asks if her family had been involved in the incident. Sears shares that people say her grandfather dies trying to prevent the Demon King's summoning. As a reward for his sacrifice, the Pyro Church grants their family the title of Archbishop and vows that for the next 100 years, the head of their family will hold a rank equal to that of a bishop. Jamie thinks about it, realizing why Sears seems sad. He wonders if she had been close to her grandfather. He reflects on the rank of bishop being granted to the family, finding it a foolish reward, but understanding its significance since the relic had been the church's only one. He muses about how he can use this to his advantage before eventually carrying out his own plans. A sly smile appears on his face, and he starts laughing quietly. Sears calls his name, snapping him out of his thoughts. He quickly changes his expression, responding to her warmly as Mom. She asks if he would like another cup of tea, and he agrees. Later that night, during a gathering, someone announces that Shino, their younger brother chosen by their father Zenith, will leave home to embark on his journey. The group blesses him and celebrates the auspicious occasion. They raise their glasses and congratulate him. Ricky thinks happily that Shino is finally heading to the main church. Sometime after, Shino sits in a carriage and calls out to Ricky and Anna, expressing gratitude that they came to see him off despite the sudden decision. He says he had thought he wouldn't get the chance to say goodbye. He thanks them for their support. Ricky reassures Shino, saying that the priest told him he too will leave soon, so there's no reason to feel lonely. Shino smiles, promising he won't cry and vowing to wait for them. The coachman signals the horses to move, and the carriage rides away. The carriage eventually stops near a building. The priest accompanying Shino tells him they have arrived. Shino is surprised and asks if they are already at their destination. Looking out the window, he thinks the location couldn't possibly be the main church, as the journey hasn't been long enough. Feeling uneasy, he asks the priest if this is truly the main branch of the Pyro Church at the main church. The priest instructs him to follow and begins walking away. Shino hesitates but follows reluctantly. The priest pulls a hidden mechanism by activating a certain book, revealing a concealed passage. He explains that they need to descend. Shino, growing more anxious, follows while questioning why they are entering a basement. As they go down, he tries to voice his concern, saying the place seems strange. Suddenly, a mutilated human hand emerges from an open door. Shino, horrified, runs to the priest, telling him something terrifying is inside. The priest removes his hood and addresses someone as Bishop, revealing that he has brought the boy. Shino, confused, asks in disbelief if the man just said Bishop. He kneels down, frightened, and pleads for an explanation. He asks why he is in such a strange place instead of the main church, pointing out the presence of monsters. The bishop reassures him with a sinister tone, affirming that Shino is indeed chosen. Shino cries, asking why he is in such a terrible place. The bishop explains that this is where their utopia has been achieved, adding that he is curious to see what such a pure and innocent child could become. He urges Shino to step forward. At that moment, the door opens, and a figure with grotesque growths on his body enters. The figure remarks with satisfaction that this time, they have found worthy experimental subjects, and Shino will become a beautiful chimera. The man then extends his hand to the terrified Shino. Later, in the Hisa territory of Count Welton, Jamie points out that it is Belbart Street, the largest street in Hisa. The man mentions that he remembers the place and recalls the difficult night he had there when he was starving. Jamie acknowledges this, understanding his plight. He reflects that the reason he is showing the city to the knight is straightforward. That morning, during a tea party, while drinking his tea calmly, Arjuna suggests that Jamie show Hisi to the knight, praising Jamie for his intelligence. The knight finds the idea appealing, but Jamie becomes so angry that he breaks his teacup. In the present, Jamie walks with an annoyed expression, thinking about his bad luck and feeling as if someone has cursed him. The knight observes Jamie's stamina and sharp memory for a 9-year-old, speculating that he could easily excel in the executive bodies or even higher positions. He notes that it is unsurprising the Count asked him to accompany Jamie. He calls Jamie's name, and Jamie turns toward him. The knight thanks Jamie, mentioning how the tour has allowed him to thoroughly explore Hiesa. Jamie responds that he hasn't been outside for a while, so he has enjoyed the experience too. The knight extends his hand, suggesting they return now that the tour is complete. Jamie refuses the gesture and instead asks if he can inquire about something. The knight, slightly disappointed, agrees. Jamie questions him about his conversation with his father the previous day. The knight, surprised by the sudden question, had expected Jamie to ask about being a holy knight. Instead, he jokes that they had talked about how handsome Jamie is, and how much more handsome he will be when he grows up. Jamie, irritated, accuses him of lying. The knight, embarrassed, wonders why Jamie doesn't enjoy such compliments. He insists that it is the truth, and adds that they had only spoken about Jamie, emphasizing how much his father loves him. Jamie dismisses the explanation, remarking that even children wouldn't believe such a story. The knight laughs and admits to deceiving Jamie but explains that it is a matter between adults, which he can't disclose. Jamie, deep in thought, turns away and suspects something significant is happening in Hisa, which might have prompted the city tour. The knight, noticing Jamie's silence, asks if he is angry. Jamie ignores him, continuing to wonder about the situation. The knight grows anxious, unsure how to fix the situation, and worried that Jamie is offended. Jamie recalls something and announces that there is one more place he wants to show. The knight, surprised, asks what the place is. Jamie reveals that it is the Zenith Church in Hisa. Sometime later, they arrive at the church, and the knight inquires if Jamie is no longer upset. Jamie reassures him that he isn't angry and points out that they have reached their destination. At the entrance to the church, Ricky is sweeping the floor when he notices someone approaching. The knight, looking around, remarks on the church's appearance. Ricky recognizes Jamie and exclaims, identifying him as the boy with black hair. The knight asks if Ricky is Jamie's friend, noting that he seems to be staring at Jamie. Jamie remembers Ricky but pretends not to know him, insisting this is the first time they have met. He thinks to himself that changing his hair color hasn't been enough to avoid recognition. Ricky questions why Jamie is acting as if they don't know each other. Suddenly, a carriage speeds toward them. Ricky runs up to Jamie, asking if he has dyed his hair and remarking that it has made him hard to recognize. He then notices the rapidly approaching carriage. The coachman, panicked, yells for Ricky to get out of the way. Both the knight and Jamie are startled as they see the horses rear up in an attempt to stop. The knight starts running to save Ricky, shouting loudly. Ricky becomes terrified at the sight and begins crying. He looks at the approaching horses and realizes he won't have enough time to get out of the way. The knight notices something unusual and is momentarily surprised. Meanwhile, Ricky continues crying and asks in fear if he is about to die. Jamie, observing the scene, begins releasing his magical energy. Using his chain field skill, he quickly creates a magic circle and summons chains formed from magical energy. The chains restrain the horses, buying enough time for the knight to save Ricky by pulling him out of harm's way. The knight turns around to see the magical chains holding back the carriage and horses. Ricky, still in shock, asks if he is alive, then hugs Jamie tightly and thanks him profusely. Jamie becomes irritated and tells Ricky to let go of him, saying he is too strong and Jamie can't bear it anymore. The knight observes the situation and reflects that the magic Jamie used to save Ricky is incredibly powerful, far beyond anything he has ever seen. He marvels at the idea that, at just 9 years old, Jamie has already developed such strength. Ricky continues clinging to Jamie, expressing immense gratitude and calling Jamie his savior. Jamie, struggling to free himself, tells Ricky to stop hanging on him because he is heavy. The knight thinks to himself that Jamie is a true genius and predicts that, in just a few years, Jamie will become so powerful that no one will dare to challenge him. Jamie, annoyed, asks why Ricky is acting as though he has narrowly escaped death. He then insists they move on. The knight, still recovering from the scene, asks where they are going. Jamie replies, questioning why the knight even has to ask, and reiterates that they need to go to the Zenith Church. The knight agrees, but privately thinks Jamie seems to carry himself with a superiority that feels unsettling. A short while later, Ricky expresses his excitement, saying it is great timing because he has been planning to head to the church as well. He offers to guide them, proudly stating that he knows the Zenith Church very well. With a joyful look, he explains that the church operates as a shelter for children like him who have no place to live. Just then, an old woman calls out to Ricky. Recognizing her, Ricky greets her. The woman then asks where he has been and inquires about the people accompanying him, which puts the knight and Jamie on alert. Ricky explains that a fast-moving carriage had been heading straight for him, but these individuals had saved him. He calls them his saviors. The old woman, shocked, asks if Ricky is all right and acknowledges how scared he must have been. She thanks the knight and Jamie, saying that, thanks to them, Ricky has escaped a terrible fate. The knight humbly replies that he is simply doing his duty as a servant of Pyro. The old woman is surprised to learn he is from the Pyro Church. The knight points to Jamie and adds that the boy has done much more to help. Jamie, feeling embarrassed, thinks the knight's comment is unnecessary. The old woman seems about to say something about Jamie, but is interrupted when the knight introduces Jamie as the son of the ruler of the local lands. Jamie formally introduces himself, giving his first and last name. The old woman, recovering from her surprise, remarks that she should have realized this when she saw his emerald hair. She explains that she had been too shocked by the incident to notice. Jamie finds her reaction suspicious. If she is from Hisa, she should have immediately recognized him by his distinct hair color. He wonders why she seems so flustered and considers whether she might be hiding something. The old woman asks if they have come to bring Ricky home. The knight clarifies that they are there because he has heard about the recent activities of the Zenith Church in the area. The old woman, realizing they are guests, invites them to follow her inside. She suggests Ricky give Jamie a tour of the place. Ricky seems surprised and hesitates, asking if he really needs to give them a tour. Jamie grows suspicious, wondering if the old woman is trying to separate them. Concerned she might harm Ricky, he warns the boy that, if anything happens, he will miss dinner with his parents that evening. The knight is taken aback by Jamie's comment, but, with a smile, agrees that they will see each other later. Ricky, feeling shy, starts the tour and explains that the place is an orphanage where he lives. He points toward a direction, saying it leads to the dining hall. Jamie tells Ricky he can drop the formalities because they look ridiculous. He says he doesn't care about such things, and suggests Ricky treat him as he did before. Ricky, surprised, asks if he really can, and Jamie replies that he shouldn't make him repeat himself. Ricky enthusiastically says they should continue, as he will show Jamie everything around. Jamie, confused by Ricky's happiness, cannot understand why he is so cheerful. Later, Ricky tells Jamie he has shown him almost everything and mentions that he lives with his sister. He assumes Jamie wanted to know where that was. Jamie denies this, saying he hadn't even considered it. Ricky opens the door and introduces Jamie to his sister Anna as his friend. Jamie silently questions who said they were friends. Anna begins to rise and asks her brother if what he said is true. Jamie is stunned when he sees her. Ricky helps Anna stand and tells her to greet Jamie, describing him as an amazing person. Anna introduces herself and says her name. Ricky looks at Jamie and asks if something is wrong. Jamie, still standing in surprise, is struck by Anna's holy essence. He notices her eyes are filled with divine power. Jamie reflects on the nature of holy beings, individuals endowed with God's power more than others, who can wield it freely from birth. One part of their body often holds a significant concentration of this power. Ricky calls Anna's name and explains that her blindness resulted from the overwhelming power within her. He mentions that when she awakens, her divine eyes will reveal all the true streams of the world. Jamie realizes that this power could become a threat to him in the future. He debates whether he should kill her now, but concludes it would be too dangerous. If he can sense her essence, so can a high-ranking priest, making such an action far too risky. Ricky begins to ask Jamie something and calls his name. Smiling, he asks if Jamie has fallen in love with his sister. Jamie, startled by the question, quickly denies it, asking what kind of nonsense Ricky is talking about. Ricky teases that his sister is still young, but before he can finish, Anna hits him on the head with a book and says she has something to ask him. She hides her annoyance and explains there is something confusing in a book she is reading, asking if Ricky can help her. Ricky agrees to help, still rubbing his head after being hit with the book's corner. The three sit on the bed together. Ricky asks Anna if she's stuck on the part where Heine's left. Jamie watches them and reflects on Anna's holy power, wondering who its source might be. He decides he needs to keep an eye on them. Ricky explains to Anna that Heine's went to a high tower far away where no one could find him. Anna replies that she knew it was a tower, not a cave. Jamie, feeling it is time to leave, wonders if he should go. Ricky notices and asks if Jamie is heading to the restroom. Jamie denies this, saying he is leaving entirely. Ricky gets up and insists on walking Jamie to the exit, telling Anna he will be back soon. As they walk, Ricky asks Jamie if he will visit them again. Jamie, thinking Ricky is unusually sociable, asks what would make him want to return. Ricky is surprised by the question and wonders if Jamie is joking in a friendly way. Jamie, looking dejected, says Ricky is imagining things. Ricky explains that at first he was content being close to his sister, but after arriving at the orphanage, his perspective changed. With a joyful expression, he shares that he now wants to be chosen by God Zenith and become a priest. He adds that one of his friends from the orphanage was chosen yesterday and has gone to the main church. Ricky says he is jealous of his friend. Jamie is startled and carefully processes Ricky's words. He reflects on the church, human trafficking, and the concept of the chosen one, realizing something is amiss. Jamie, visibly shocked, asks Ricky where he was before coming to the orphanage. Ricky, confused by the question, replies that he was on the streets. Jamie, growing more concerned, presses further, asking where Ricky was even before that. Ricky, bewildered by Jamie's behavior, responds that he worked at Reaver and asks why Jamie is suddenly asking about this. Jamie, now certain, realizes that Zenith is involved. The knight bows and expresses that he enjoys their conversation. The old woman responds that she does as well. She remarks that since he is leaving, she will guide him to the young master. He agrees with a smile, expressing gratitude. He wonders why she is so silent, suspecting that it might be due to her distrust of priests from other churches. He also speculates that these people might be connected to the chimeras. As the old woman walks down the corridor, she asks Ricky if he gave the young master a tour. Ricky confirms that he did, but turns around, startled by someone's arrival. The bishop approaches and comments that it seems an important guest has visited during his absence. Ricky greets him respectfully. The bishop acknowledges the young master, calling it an honor to meet him. Jamie introduces himself, stating his full name, while thinking that everything aligns. It is the Zenith Church that kidnaps the children. The bishop inquires about Ras's identity, and Ras introduces himself as Ras Armetic, stating that he serves Fierro. The bishop, upon hearing this, notes that Ras is from another church. Jamie is puzzled, trying to discern the Zenith Church's objectives. He suspects that Ras's presence might be connected to their plans. The bishop apologizes for his absence, expressing regret that he couldn't be there for the visit. Ras reassures him, saying there is no need to apologize as he had a pleasant time at the church. Jamie notices a man in armor nearby and senses strange energy emanating from him. He realizes that the man is a paladin, as indicated by his divine power, but notes that something about him seems off. Jamie observes that the paladin appears to be reacting oddly to Ras, raising further suspicions. The bishop, catching Jamie's watchful gaze, looks at him with suspicion. Later, as Jamie leaves the church, he notices Ras walking thoughtfully. Jamie comments that Ricky had told him about his friend who was chosen by God and sent to the main church, adding that Ricky is envious and hopes to become a priest himself. Ras is visibly surprised by this revelation. Ras remarks that Ricky is a good person and that his dream will likely come true someday. Jamie, studying Ras's reaction, wonders if a subtle hint might be enough. He then asks Ras if he might have heard anything about this from his father. Ras, confused, asks what he is supposed to have heard. Jamie explains that 2 months ago, his father destroyed a rebel gang that had been kidnapping and selling children. This information deeply shocks Ras. Jamie continues, mentioning that Ricky had previously been part of this gang before coming to the orphanage. Ras is further startled and questions if Ricky was truly involved with the gang. Jamie smiles inwardly, thinking that Ras might finally be piecing things together. To nudge him further, Jamie comments on the Zenith Church's significant spending on charity. Ras, suddenly remembering something, clenches his fists in anger, realizing that the Zenith Church has never engaged in charity. He suspects that if they built the orphanage, it might be to use the children for sinister purposes. Later, Ras discusses his thoughts, saying that the rebel gang and the Zenith Church seem to be connected, and notes that Ricky's history with the gang reinforces this suspicion. Argino responds that he had only observed the Zenith Church because it seemed to have a positive influence on his lands. Ras adds that when they were leaving the church, he encountered a priest with a paladin. He expresses confusion, explaining that while he sensed a powerful divine force, it was impossible to confirm whether the paladin served the Zenith Church. He notes that the divine power seemed mixed with something else. Argino, alarmed, asks if Ras believes the paladin might be a chimera capable of using divine powers. Argino states that if their suspicions are correct, They cannot remain idle, and he decides to send his knights immediately. Ras, however, interrupts and urges caution, emphasizing the need for proof. Arjuna warns that such a mission will be very dangerous. Ras, filled with determination, assures him that he is ready to face any danger. Arjuna then asks about the likelihood of success. Ras confidently replies that he feels he has the advantage in this situation. Arjuna waves his hand and informs Ras that he will assign 3 of his men to assist him. Suddenly, 3 individuals appear in the room without making a sound. Ras turns around in surprise, initially unaware of their presence, and realizes how stealthy they are. Arjuna explains that these knights are the Welton family's shadow protectors, highly skilled professionals who will be useful for the mission. Ras studies the 3 individuals, noting that despite wielding bastard swords, their appearance and movements resemble assassins. He questions whether they are truly knights, to which Arjuna confirms they are. Ras thanks him and vows to uncover the truth behind their adversaries' intentions. Arjuna entrusts the mission to Ras, leaving the matter in his hands. Meanwhile, Jamie observes the scene through black and reflects on the situation. The use of divine power and innocent children as raw materials for creating chimeras strikes him as truly evil. He considers the practicality of the plan, but questions whether any gods would condone such atrocities, concluding that Zenith remains a depraved figure. Lying on his bed, Jamie ponders the matter further. He notes that the unpreparedness of their enemies suggests they are pressed for time. Realizing it is time to act, he summons Black and hands it a letter, instructing it to deliver the message to Ryza. Black immediately flies off to fulfill the task. Jamie remarks that it is time for him to prepare as well, knowing that the highest level of magic will be necessary for the battles ahead. He resolves to make Zenith regret his actions. Elsewhere, Azard and Ryza are on watch, waiting for any signs of movement. Growing restless, Azard questions how much longer they need to stay there. Ryza, maintaining his vigilance, reminds him that they have to follow orders. Frustrated, Azard laments the lack of action, complaining that not even a mouse stirs in the area. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps. A man in armor approaches, his steps echoing ominously. Ryza turns toward the sound and spots the figure. The paladin grips the sword on his back and declares his intent to kill. Azard, taken aback, freezes momentarily. Ryza shouts for him to dodge as the paladin unleashes a swift attack, sending a wave of energy their way. Azard manages to avoid the attack and notes the cruel nature of the divine power being used. The paladin channels dark, oppressive energy into his weapon, repeating his declaration to kill. Recognizing the danger, Ryza decides to warn Jamie. He urges Azard to retreat, saying he will hold the line. Azard runs off, promising to return soon. The paladin tracks their movements and unleashes another devastating wave of energy. Azard turns back and sees the impending attack, prompting Ryza to shout for him to jump. Ryza sprints toward Azard, pushing him out of a window just in time. Azard tumbles outside, calling out to his brother as he falls. Inside, Ryza takes the full brunt of the paladin's attack, sustaining severe injuries. Coughing up blood, he weakly calls out for his master. Jamie responds by activating his Dark Dimension skill. A magic circle envelops the building, creating a protective barrier. He appears inside the house and addresses his injured servant, asking if he has summoned him. Ryza lies injured by the window, while the paladin stands firmly in the middle of the room. Jamie smiles and states that no one will be aware of what is happening inside, as his spell is powerful enough to ensure secrecy. He exhales in relief, reflecting that using 6th rank magic, even with Black's help and subconscious mastery, is still a challenge. The paladin remains silent for a moment before suddenly charging toward Jamie, declaring his intent to kill. Jamie calmly responds, inviting him to try. Concentrating energy in his hands, he casts the gravity spell, a rank 5 magic technique designed to increase gravitational force and immobilize the target. The paladin falls to his knees under the immense pressure of the spell's energy. Jamie follows up with the Death Script spell, summoning spectral entities to restrain the paladin. Despite the restraints, the paladin struggles, repeatedly proclaiming his intent to kill as he reaches out toward them. Jamie then uses the Sacrifice spell, sacrificing the summoned souls to create a massive explosion of energy. A voice within the paladin's mind warns of impending danger just before the spell detonates, unleashing a powerful blast of magical energy. After the explosion, Jamie observes the aftermath. The paladin, although severely wounded, remains kneeling and alive. Jamie notes aloud that the paladin seems to be at an expert level of power. The paladin tightens his grip on his sword, channeling energy into it, and shouts his intent to kill everyone as he charges forward with all his might. Unfazed, Jamie remarks that while the paladin has a strong spirit, he has encountered the wrong opponent. He releases threads of energy and casts the puppet spell. The threads wrap around the paladin, binding him and piercing his soul to impose complete submission. The paladin falls to his knees, rendered powerless against the restraints. As he analyzes the situation, the paladin concludes that further fighting is pointless. He realizes he is facing an invincible opponent and decides his best course of action is to escape. He begins releasing energy from within his body. Jamie, noticing this, is startled and suspects the paladin is initiating self-destruction. He quickly moves toward him, urging him not to rush. Channeling energy rapidly, Jamie uses the Hand of Darkness spell, which pierces the paladin's body with immense force. However, the paladin's energy release continues unabated. Jamie is puzzled, questioning why he cannot stop the process. The paladin's body begins emitting bright beams of light as the energy intensifies. Realizing he cannot evade what is coming, Jamie hastily withdraws his hand from the paladin's body. Despite his efforts, the paladin continues radiating energy, which culminates in a massive explosion that obliterates the room. Brilliant beams of light break through the building's windows. Reflecting on the situation, Jamie acknowledges that if it weren't for Black's intervention, he might have been in serious trouble. He marvels at the paladin's ability to escape the dark dimension by unleashing all his holy energy. It is unexpected, but Jamie concludes that this trick will not save the paladin. He instructs Black to absorb the emitted light. Meanwhile, the paladin, now desperate, begins sprinting out of the building, intent on escaping. Jamie channels energy into his palms, determined to stop him. As he strikes the paladin's back, grotesque tentacles and large teeth erupt from the paladin's body. Observing the horrifying transformation, Jamie realizes that the paladin's true form as a chimera has been revealed. Without hesitation, Jamie casts the chain field spell, creating magical chains to capture and immobilize the monster. Telling the chimera to disappear, Jamie tightens the chains around the chimera's body. Folding his hands in front of him, he casts the Death Blast spell, causing a powerful explosion within the creature. Blood sprays across the room as the monster, still bound by chains, endures the devastating attack. The Deathly Explosion spell, designed to destroy even the strongest armor, seems insufficient. The chimera, though critically injured, remains alive and thinks to itself that its physical form is in a critical state, rendering movement impossible. As a last resort, it activates its final function. A small creature emerges from the monster's body and flees rapidly. Surprised, Jamie wonders if this is the chimera's true form. The creature leaps out of the building and disappears into an unknown direction. Standing by the window, Jamie then admits that he lost it. Riza, bloodied but still able to stand, approaches Jamie and addresses him. He commends Jamie for his efforts but asks what has happened to the chimera. Jamie calmly replies that he simply missed it. Perplexed by Jamie's nonchalant attitude, Riza questions Jamie if this is normal, emphasizing that they should act urgently and try to track and catch up with the chimera. In response, Jamie reassures him, telling Riza that it doesn't matter that much even though they couldn't capture the chimera. Still confused, Riza expresses his inability to understand the reasoning, asking Jamie for clarification. Jamie then decides to explain further by demonstrating using his energy. He points out that traces of black mana are not easy to erase. Internally, Jamie reflects that when the chimera is pierced by the Hand of Darkness, its body is saturated with black mana, making it easy for him to track. Meanwhile, in his office, the bishop sits writing when he notices something banging against his window. A chimera is trying to climb into the room. The bishop quickly brings the creature inside and examines it. Displeased, he questions how the creature, one of their most significant research outcomes, has been defeated. It is unthinkable that a Holy Knight chimera, imbued with holy energy, could be destroyed. Back at the house, Riza voices his concerns, asking Jamie if the enemy could detect the black magic used against them and attempt to track it. Jamie reassures him, saying that he understands why he is worried, but he explains that they won't be able to find out. Smiling, Jamie releases his energy and states that his current powers are entirely different from black magic. Inwardly, Jamie reflects on the peculiar relationship between black magic and holy energy. Despite his magic being designed to kill gods and erase their existence without a trace, he still finds it puzzling that black magic struggles against holy energy. He concludes that no matter how hard the holy energy users try, they will never uncover his identity. At the same time, the bishop, consumed by anger in his office, declares that he will not rest until he discovers who is capable of such destruction. Sometime later, Jamie channels his energy into the paladin's body, reflecting that his magic was designed to kill gods from the beginning, so there is no need to worry. He then asks where Azard has gone. Riza recalls Azard, and is about to explain when the door to the building suddenly opens. Azard bursts into the room and eagerly asks his brother how he is feeling and if he is safe. He expresses his relief and delight at seeing Jamie, commenting that it seemed like the paladin was going to turn Reza into a pile of bones, but it looks like Jamie resolved the issue. Jamie confirms that he sorted out the problem and acknowledges that it was indeed his doing. He then questions Azard about where he had gone. Azard recalls the events, explaining that he lost consciousness after falling out of the window and, upon regaining his senses, immediately came back. Confused, Jamie sarcastically asks if even a zombie could lose consciousness. Reza intervenes, stating that he simply pushed Azard out of the window. Azard attempts to justify his actions, but Jamie interrupts, scolding him and telling him to lower his head in shame. He cancels the order to spy on their enemies, explaining that their movements are being noticed too quickly and that they would be caught if they continued in such a manner. He stresses the need for caution. Reza acknowledges Jamie's instructions. Jamie raises his hand, channeling energy to heal Reza's wounds, which surprises him greatly. Jamie then advises to take better care of his body since he does not have necessary ability to heal himself. He adds that Azard should stay by Reza's side at all times to guard him. Azard immediately agrees to the directive. Jamie walks to the window and announces that he has to leave. He instructs the two of them to return and remain cautious. Both acknowledge his orders. Jamie jumps out of the window, summoning wings of energy behind him as he descends. Meanwhile, the bishop loudly expresses his disbelief, exclaiming that it is unthinkable for the paladin chimera to be so severely damaged. He questions who could have done such a thing and how it was even possible for an expert-level paladin chimera created from 4 life forms to be reduced to such a state. The bishop recalls Earl Welton and wonders if it could have been him. He tries to piece together the situation, reasoning that if it were Earl Welton, the main body of the chimera would not have survived. Furthermore, the severed connection with the paladin was caused by tearing magic, which required a barrier. He considers that the only magician of such a level in the region is the young master. However, he dismisses the idea, reasoning that even though the young master is a genius, he is only at the 4th rank. To defeat a chimera of that level, one would need to be at least rank 5. The bishop questions who else it could have been. Concluding that he needs to accelerate his experiments, the bishop resolves to act before it is too late. Suddenly, a dagger is pressed against his throat, and a voice demands to know if his second plan has failed. The bishop remains silent, prompting the lady to remark that she was correct. The bishop slowly turns toward her and denies the accusation, insisting that his plan has not failed. The lady smiles and challenges him, asking what the state of the chimera means, if not failure. The bishop insists that his plan is simply unfinished. The lady makes a shallow cut on his neck and sarcastically asks if the current state of the chimera is due to its unfinished nature. The bishop explained that there had been an obstacle hindering their progress, but assured that the experiment would be completed after a few more trials. The girl dismissed his explanation, remarking that he talked too much for someone unable to identify the interference. She questioned if he wished to become part of the experiment himself. Before he could respond, she interrupted, warning him that she would be watching and that everything would end if the count intervened. With those words, she vanished. The bishop exhaled deeply, relieved by her departure. Reflecting on the situation, he realized the 7 knights of the Zenith Church had been observing him. These elite swordsmen, protectors of the archbishop in the main church, were all at the master level. Slamming his fist on the table, he raged against the humiliation, blaming the archbishop. He vowed that once the experiments were completed, he would rise to take the archbishop's place. Meanwhile, Jamie examined the chimera's body and noted that he might have gone too far. He remarked on the ingenuity behind the holy chimera's creation. As he studied the armor and dissected its components, he observed that the creature was constructed using 4 life forms: insect legs, internal organs with fire resistance, compound insect eyes, and a human body serving as the primary structure. At its core was a ball filled with divine power, enabling it to function as a paladin. He pondered the purpose of creating such a creature and speculated that Zenith might be preparing for war. Deep in thought, Jamie expressed his disdain for the Zenith Church, criticizing their unchanged view of humans as mere materials. As he examined the chimera, memories from the past surfaced, including voices recalling the atrocities of the gods and his own determination to stop them. He resolved that humanity, having suffered once, would not endure the tyranny of the 12 gods again. His rebirth after millennia was a testament to his purpose, to bring an end to their rule. Later, the bishop communicated with someone through a magic ball, complaining about the day's events. He admitted that the situation had gone beyond his expectations and that the main body of the chimera had survived, but the damage was unavoidable. The person on the other end angrily chastised him, dismissing his excuses. The bishop defended himself, blaming the appearance of a third party for the failure. This response shocked the other person, who questioned his explanation. Another man, bearing unusual growths, joined the conversation and inquired about the bishop's next steps. The bishop revealed that he intended to choose another individual for the experiment. When the man suggested using the child with the holy essence, expressing eagerness to experiment on such material, the bishop slammed the table in anger. He firmly declared that holy essence would not be wasted on creating chimeras. Instead, he revealed that a new target had already been chosen, a loyal servant of Zenith and the sole blood relative of the saintess, Ricky. Sometime later, the old woman approaches Ricky and informs him that she has finally found him. Ricky turns to his sister and asks if she needs his help. The old woman explains that everyone has been asked to gather in the main hall. Ricky confirms, repeating the location, and says he will run there immediately. In the main hall, a crowd of people chat among themselves. Ricky notices Ben sitting next to Anna and asks him why he is there. Ben explains that he has brought Anna because everyone has been instructed to come. Ricky, annoyed, pushes Ben away and scolds him, saying that doesn't mean he should cling to Anna like chewing gum. He adds that he is late because he has been looking for his sister. Then he wonders why everyone has been gathered so suddenly. Ben speculates that perhaps a new chosen one has been identified. Anna smiles and comments that such news would be wonderful. The bishop steps onto the stage and greets the crowd, asking if everyone is doing well. The people respond affirmatively. He then announces that he has great news. A new prediction has been received from their god. The crowd buzzes with excitement, asking if this is the same kind of prediction as before with Shino and if someone has been chosen. The bishop laughs and confirms their guess, stating that Zenith has indeed chosen someone once again. While observing their enthusiastic reaction, the bishop quietly mocks them under his breath, calling them stupid idiots who are blindly eager to become the chosen ones. Addressing the crowd, he remarks aloud that becoming a paladin is a blessing for an orphan, but silently adds that this blessing is just a means to create the next chimera. Then, raising his voice to a normal tone, he instructs everyone to sit down and reveals that this time, Zenith has chosen Ricky. Quietly to himself, he adds with a smirk, thinking that Ricky will become the next chimera. Sometime later, during rainy weather at the mansion, Sears comments that the rain seems to be letting up. Jamie agrees, expressing hope for better weather soon. Sears remarks that tea parties on rainy days are delightful, to which Jamie responds with a forced laugh, saying that the smell of rain is refreshing, and being with his mother makes it even better. Sears hugs him, appreciating his kind words. A knock at the door interrupts their moment. A servant enters and apologizes for the disturbance, announcing that a guest has arrived to see Jamie. Surprised, Jamie asks who it is. The servant explains that a commoner child claiming to be Jamie's friend has come to visit and asks if he should be turned away. Jamie, puzzled, asks for confirmation that the visitor is a commoner and not a noble. Realizing who it might be, he recalls, wondering if the person is the one he is thinking about. Standing up, Jamie instructs the servant to bring the guest in. Shortly after, Ricky enters the room, looking nervous. He greets them and apologizes for the intrusion. Sears warmly welcomes him, expressing delight that her son's friend has come to visit. She invites him to sit down. Jamie recognizes Ricky and grows annoyed, silently questioning why Ricky has presumed they are friends. Sears, smiling kindly, asks Ricky his name and where he lives. Ricky introduces himself and mentions that he lives at the church of the god Zenith. Sears acknowledges this and asks why he has come to visit Jamie. Ricky hesitates before beginning to explain, mentioning that it is about the other night. Before he can finish, Jamie quickly covers Ricky's mouth with his hand. Embarrassed, Jamie tells his mother they will go play on their own and suggests she take a rest. Sears, smiling, observes them fondly and thinks to herself that her son must be feeling shy about having his friend over. She reflects on how much Jamie has grown. Jamie thinks he cannot afford to get caught, as he dreads the punishments that would follow, suffocating hugs, unwanted kisses, and sharing a bed. Sears agrees with him but insists he should kiss her goodbye. Jamie is horrified, feeling this is an even greater challenge. Determined to find a way out, he reluctantly walks up to Sears and kisses her on the cheek. Ricky observes the scene with a surprised expression. Sears leaves the room looking delighted and wishes them a good time. Jamie, visibly exhausted, mutters that of course they will. Ricky bows and bids her farewell, then turns to Jamie and remarks that his mother must love him deeply. Jamie brushes it off and demands to know why Ricky is there. Ricky remembers his reason for visiting and explains that he has been chosen and will soon leave. He came to say goodbye. Jamie is shocked and asks him to repeat what he said. Sometime later, Ras, looking despondent, reflects on how the strange paladin has been missing for days. He wonders if the paladin has vanished entirely, and laments that he learned nothing from observing the church. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to Ricky loudly bidding farewell. Ricky leaves with a cheerful demeanor, turning to greet Ras in a casual manner, which infuriates Ras, though he hides it. Ras hugs Ricky and insists he should call him Big Brother. Ricky complies and addresses him as such. Ras asks if Ricky came to see Jamie, and Ricky confirms, adding that he has news for Ras as well. Ricky reveals that he has received a prophecy from the god Zenith, which greatly surprises Ras. He asks Ricky to clarify, and Ricky explains that he has been chosen and will depart for the main church the following morning. Ras, skeptical, internally condemns the church for deceiving children in this way. He pats Ricky on the head, leaving Ricky slightly confused. Ras praises the news and assures Ricky that he will become an excellent priest. Ricky is elated and agrees, stating that he wants to help those in need, just like Ras. He departs, promising to return to check on Ras. Once Ricky is gone, Ras sternly addresses the three knights who appear behind him. He orders them to track the carriage transporting Ricky the next morning, vowing to deal with the situation. He believes the church's deception warrants severe consequences. The next day, Ricky departs with the priests, expressing gratitude to everyone who came to see him off. He promises to return once he has become a priest. Anna and Ben watch with tears in their eyes as Ricky assures them he will care for his sister. Ben thanks him, and Anna encourages him to return to them when his training is complete. Ricky, overwhelmed with emotion, hugs Anna, reminding her to listen to the church's guidance, eat well, and not worry. He vows to write often and to return as soon as he can. Anna smiles through her tears and makes him promise to stay healthy and come back to her. Ricky climbs into the carriage, which departs from the church. Raz, cloaked and hidden, observes the scene closely. He instructs his companions to follow the carriage. Meanwhile, Jamie sits in his room, meditating and concentrating energy in his hands. Opening his eyes, he notes that they are gone. He channels energy to his fingers and contemplates whether to check on the hidden bug. Jamie looks at Black, who flies next to his head, and comments that he recognizes the traces of black mana as belonging to the Zenith Church. He imagines a man folding his hands in prayer and recalls that 3 things are necessary to create a holy chimera: a sacrifice in the form of a person, a creator capable of leading the experiment, and a high-ranking priest to infuse holy energy. Lowering his gaze thoughtfully, Jamie remembers there is only one high-ranking priest in this area. He pictures a 50-year-old man in a priest's uniform, a faint smile on his face, with the symbol of the church glowing behind him. The scene shifts to a forest where a nearly imperceptible shadow darts along the branches. Raz, wrapped in a cloak, moves swiftly from tree to tree, following the carriage in which Ricky sits. At the same time, Jamie understands that if Raz and his knights are involved, they can likely handle the laboratory on their own. Adjusting his tie with one hand and holding his dark coat with the other, Jamie smiles at Black flying beside him. He declares that he only needs to take care of Lincoln. Pulling his cloak over himself, Jamie anticipates his victory. The setting shifts to the Zenith Church, where Lincoln stands in the middle of a room, his cloak fluttering in the wind coming through the window. He extends his hand into a mirror, which ripples as his hand enters up to his elbow. Lincoln contemplates giving a blessing to the orphan chosen to become a holy knight. Meanwhile, Ricky stands with his back to the mirror in a room far from the county, alongside one of the cloaked monks of the church. Suddenly, a hand emerges from the mirror behind Ricky, reaching out to grab him. Lincoln's hand almost touches Ricky's shoulder, intending to test and toy with him, but something unexpected happens. Lincoln flinches and looks at his hand in confusion. A whip of dark energy wraps around his arm and torso, pulling him back. The dark mana whips tighten, nearly pulling Lincoln to the ground. Gritting his teeth in anger, Lincoln stands and looks at the magician who has attacked him, demanding to know his identity. Hovering in front of him, wrapped in a dark cloak with a hood, is Jamie. "There," Jamie comments with a smirk. "You talk rough for a cleric." Lincoln, now sitting on the floor, shudders as he realizes the magician before him is a black magician. Tendrils of dark mana coil around Jamie as he smiles at Lincoln's reaction. Lincoln clenches his hands, his eyebrows knitting together and jaw set, as he begins to concentrate mana around his clasped hands. Infuriated by Jamie's interference, he focuses intensely. The mana in the room goes wild, raising a column of energy, and Lincoln shouts that he will show Jamie the wrath of God. A glowing formation with the symbol of the Zenith Church appears beneath both Jamie and Lincoln as Lincoln uses magic to create a holy field. 2 lightning bolts pierce through Lincoln's subconscious, momentarily illuminating his dark soul. A side effect of a field blessed by God, which greatly strengthens the priest. Jamie watches Lincoln's actions closely, assessing the holy field. He surmises that Lincoln now possesses enough strength to crush a boulder with his bare hands. Grinning, Lincoln holds one hand with the other and announces that he will quickly finish Jamie. Channeling mana around his palms, Lincoln raises his fist and charges directly at Jamie, a mad smile spreading across his face. Lincoln approaches with his fist coated in holy power, aiming directly for Jamie's neck in an attempt to decapitate him. Jamie manages to dodge at the last second, with Lincoln's holy energy brushing mere centimeters past his head, leaving him breathless and nervous. Lincoln laughs madly, taunting Jamie about his condition and deciding to use him as an offering. Lincoln's fist, shrouded in mana, slams into Jamie's chest at great speed, forcing him to grit his teeth in pain. But suddenly, Jamie's lips stretch into a smile, his pupil narrowing like a predator that has found its prey. He mockingly asks if this is all Lincoln can do. Lincoln stops smiling, clenching his teeth and beginning to grow nervous as dark bonds made of Jamie's mana start to envelop his hand. Lincoln frowns, not understanding what is happening. Jamie brings his hand to his mouth, extending 2 fingers, smiling as he listens to Lincoln approach and question how black magic could work in the holy field. Jamie tightens the dark mana whip around Lincoln's hand, causing him to scream in pain. In the blink of an eye, a wound appears on Lincoln's hand, from which blood sprays. Lincoln clenches his teeth, and although his hand is wrapped in dark whips of energy, he manages to look around and understand that the holy field is being devoured by darkness. Lincoln's eyes widen in fear, unable to believe what is happening. He begins screaming about the impossibility of it all. Jamie smiles, clasping his hands together, and declares it is indeed possible. Lincoln flinches as the dark energy whip wraps around his torso. He tries to pull his hand back and move away but cannot. The dark energy whip flings Lincoln, slamming him into a wall. His head collides with it, shattering the wall behind him, and blood sprays from his mouth. The dark bonds of mana close in on Lincoln, who now slumps against the wall. Jamie approaches, dark mana tentacles constantly writhing around him, and leans close to Lincoln, saying he has many questions and needs answers. Lincoln smiles despite his pain, mocking Jamie for thinking he would reveal anything. Jamie's pupil glows brightly as he smiles madly and stretches out his hand, forming a magic circle. He calmly states that he doesn't need Lincoln's permission to get answers, as he will simply pry open his brain. Jamie places his palm on Lincoln's head, dark mana swirling around them as a magic circle forms beneath their feet. Lincoln clenches his teeth, beginning to cry as his capillaries burst, turning his eyes red. Elsewhere, the bishop with the tumor leans on the table with his head bowed, while a priest stands silently nearby, watching. The priest flinches in fear when a flask flies past his head, and the bishop begins shouting, blaming Lincoln for delaying the experiment. The bishop slams his hands on the table, demanding to know why the experiment is taking so long because of Lincoln. The priest, turning around, says he will investigate, but as he fully turns, a spike made of flesh pierces his head. The bishop, with his arm outstretched, has detached a tentacle to strike the priest. He looks at the priest with anger, stating that he has been too slow. The bishop raises his head and looks toward the ceiling, sensing someone above. Suddenly, a group of people opens the door and enters his hiding place. Raz and his team stand before the bookcases, carefully inspecting them. One member of the group, a ghostly swordsman, raises a finger to one of the books, trying to sense something. Raz observes the man, who reports feeling a draft in that area. Raz examines the books closely and notices one that stands out from the rest. Carefully, he begins removing books with his hand until, suddenly, the shelf moves to the side, surprising the group. Raz, gripping the hilt of his sword, cautiously enters the passage, noting a strange smell emanating from within. Suddenly, an iron chain bursts from the passage, rushing toward him. Raz manages to draw his sword and block the attack, but the force is too strong, causing him to bite his lower lip to stifle a scream of pain. Ras frowns, his sword trembling as he looks at his opponent. A second swing of the chain sends Ras flying. He slides, trying to regain his footing, as a red-haired girl screams in worry for him. Raz, his eyes wide, assures the girl that he is fine, and confirms they are indeed in the right place. Emerging from the opening is a huge blue monster, covered in scars, with a chain wrapped around its arm, ending in a spiked morning star. Jamie states that they must create a powerful army at any cost and questions if such a prediction has ever been made. Lincoln agrees with him. Jamie instructs Lincoln to inform the Count of everything he has just shared. The bishop acknowledges the instruction. Jamie recalls something, stops, and creates a magic circle in front of Lincoln's face. He tells Lincoln he can go, and Lincoln immediately gets up and leaves the room. Jamie thinks to himself that he has enhanced the brainwashing, and that Lincoln will now definitely not remember anything about him. As Jamie is about to touch the magic mirror, he remembers something else, stops, and uses a spell to change his appearance to resemble the bishop. He declares it is time for him to leave. The creator slams his fist on the table, expressing frustration that death may already be coming for him. He wonders where Lincoln has gone and remarks that, if not for the experiment, he would have killed Lincoln long ago. Turning around, he looks at the large flasks in the room. As he touches one of them, he expresses regret, but acknowledges he has no choice but to send it. The flask collapses, and he remarks that it should take care of the rest. The creator continues to berate Lincoln, calling him a useless idiot. The creator stands over Ricky, who lies on a table, and notes the importance of having holy power and a body. He demands the body to be brought to him immediately. Jamie, disguised as Lincoln, enters and apologizes for being late. The creator notices the blood on Jamie's clothes and face and questions what happened. Jamie explains he was attacked by a strange man and was delayed dealing with him. The creator inquires further about this strange man, and Jamie explains he believes it was the same person who killed the Holy Knight, adding that capturing him was impossible due to his strength. The creator becomes alarmed and asks if the man is working with the invaders, expressing concern that any delay will interfere with the experiment. Dismissing his concerns, the creator demands the body. Jamie questions whether the creator still plans to continue despite the invasion. The creator, angered, insists the experiment is nearly complete and reveals he has already sent the sample. Jamie wonders what the creator means by sample. The creator takes a jar containing the creature used for creating chimeras and expresses eagerness to confirm the results. Placing the creature on Ricky, he speculates about how strong the resulting chimera will be. Turning to Jamie, the creator asks for his opinion. Jamie responds that it will likely be stronger than the previous failure. The creator, annoyed by the obvious statement, takes a syringe filled with a strange liquid. He injects the liquid into the creature and presses his hand on it, urging it to merge faster. Watching the process, he comments that Lincoln must be happy about it too. Jamie responds affirmatively while silently observing the creator's madness. The creator suddenly turns with a furious expression and questions Jamie's identity. Surprised, Jamie asserts that he is Lincoln and wonders if there is some shared madness among these people. The creator releases tentacles from his body, accusing Jamie of deception and declaring that he is not Lincoln. Meanwhile, a group of knights continues advancing through the building, killing monsters along the way. Ras announces that they have defeated the last monster. Moving ahead, he suggests they descend further into the building. Unexpectedly, something moves very quickly between the knights, demolishing one of them. Ras is surprised and notices the monster standing behind him. The monster grabs the knight with one hand and slams him into the ground. The pink-haired knight runs toward the monster, demanding it let the knight go. She strikes quickly and powerfully with her sword, causing a slight wound, but the monster appears unaffected. She realizes the monster is on a completely different level compared to the others. Ras observes that the space is too narrow for the monster's attacks and runs past it, thinking he needs to find a wider area. Entering another room, he turns to face the monster, which charges toward him. Channeling energy into his sword, he casts the Sword of Judgment spell, striking the monster as he runs past it. Smoke emerges from the monster's mouth, and its eyes roll back. However, the monster suddenly looks at him, completely unharmed, which shocks Ras. The monster approaches him very quickly, preparing to attack. Ras realizes he has been careless and knows it is too late to dodge. He believes he will die from the blow. Suddenly, one of the knights strikes with his sword, stopping the monster's attack by cutting into its hand. The monster screams loudly in pain. After the attack, the knights stand in front of Ras and ask if he is okay, suggesting they retreat. Ras agrees and suggests they raise the wounded knight. One of the knights says they should leave the knight behind. This shocks Ras, who demands to know what they just said. The knight explains that they were given an order to help Ras complete the task and cannot focus on distractions. Their words deeply surprise Ras, and he begins to cry. One of the knights charges toward the monster, jumping up and swinging his sword to open a path for the others. Another knight grabs Ras, insisting they must leave while the first knight distracts the monster. Ras refuses, arguing that the knight will die if he fights alone. The other knight acknowledges this, but explains that they are shadow knights, who act solely to achieve optimal results. He adds that their absolute loyalty to their lord is the sole purpose of their existence, and that their lives are merely instruments in their lord's hands. Ras is shocked and reflects on the Shadow Knight's approach, thinking it is madness to complete tasks at the cost of their own lives. He resolves never to accept such a method. The knight holds off the monster's attack with his sword, and orders the others to flee quickly. The roof above the monster begins to collapse with a loud sound. Ras watches in shock as the knight and the monster are buried under the rubble. Suddenly, a hand emerges from the debris, shocking everyone. The monster crawls out from under the rubble, holding the knight who tried to restrain it. Another knight urges Ras to flee, but Ras resists, insisting he cannot leave the knight to die. The monster smiles and squeezes the knight in its grip, causing him to scream in pain. Ras demands the monster release him immediately. Clutching his sword tightly, Ras's rage builds. The knight is surprised to see Ras preparing to fight and calls out to him. Ras releases a strong, bright energy and declares that he serves the goddess of mercy and justice, Pyro. With his eyes filled with determination, he looks at the monster and tells it to disappear. Slamming his sword into the ground, Ras channels his energy into it. The energy strikes the monster, which screams in pain. Ras looks at the monster and realizes it has borrowed the power of Divine Executioner. The Church of Pyro's Divine Executioner refers to the 7 holy knights given unique powers by the goddess of mercy and justice, Pyro. These powers are only effective for short attacks, but are followed by a strong backlash that demonstrates immense holiness. Sometime later, 2 knights pick up the wounded knight. One of them checks if he is okay, and the knight, enveloped in light energy, expresses disbelief at being alive. Ras explains that this power punishes the wicked and grants endless mercy to the righteous. A gift from Pyro, the goddess of mercy and justice. He reflects that when Marshall's strength is exhausted, all the suffering will fall on him, but he keeps this to himself. Ras assures the knight that he is glad he is okay. All the knights follow Ras, who instructs them to move on. At the same time, the creator releases several tentacles to grab Jamie. Jamie defends himself and flies upward using his wings. The creator, angered, accuses Jamie of interfering with his experiments, calling him a black magician. Jamie smirks and remarks on the irony of hearing such an accusation from someone who abuses his own body so extensively. The creator declares that what he does is true art and unveils chimera wings, announcing a special performance. Jamie, unimpressed, criticizes the wings for being in bad taste. The creator, taken aback, questions Jamie's audacity to insult him. However, Jamie interrupts to remind him of something. The creator notices the creature bound by threads of dark energy and recognizes it as the main material. Jamie clenches his fist and blames the creator for the situation. Enraged, the creator calls Jamie a freak. Jamie creates a magic circle and mocks the creator for becoming so emotional over a broken toy, suggesting they change locations. Suddenly, a massive magic circle appears below them. The creator, surprised, realizes it is spatial movement magic. He fears that he will not survive if this magic is completed. He attempts to tear the magic apart, but fails, questioning why it does not yield. He notices the dark magical energy surrounding him, but disappears before completing his thought. They are transported to an unknown forest far from their previous location. The creator, now fearful, wonders why he was unable to break through the magic. Jamie explains it simply. The creator is terribly weak. Jamie taunts him, suggesting they have fun in the forest, but warns that when playtime is over, he will dismember the creator and make him his slave. The creator, furious, releases his tentacles and calls Jamie arrogant. Jamie easily dodges the attacks, flying up and landing on a tree branch. He notes that everything should have ended earlier. The creator smiles and reveals 2 elite chimeras, wrapping tentacles around his arm. Jamie questions about the elites but receives no further explanation. The creator strikes the tree Jamie is on with great force. Jamie takes off as the tree falls. The creator, still angry, notes that although they handled 1 chimera before, there are now 2, and he believes the knights cannot survive. Jamie criticizes the creator for having gone beyond reason. The creator counters that it is not madness, but confidence. Jamie observes the creator's body, noting that he has implanted 7 different life forms into himself, rendering him inhuman. Despite this grotesque mixture, Jamie admits the results are impressive. As the creator charges at him, Jamie smiles, concentrating energy in his hand, and resolves to make him his slave. Meanwhile, the knights enter another room. The pink-haired knight begins commenting on their surroundings, but Ras interrupts, urging them to focus on finding the child. He reflects that he has about 20 minutes left to find Ricky before Marshall's will is depleted. He and the 3 knights start searching the room. Ras approaches a door but stops when he hears a loud sound. Turning toward it, he sees a projectile created from magical energy flying toward them at high speed. He warns the others and saves the pink-haired knight. Ras looks ahead in shock and hears strange sounds. A monster appears before him, and he recognizes it as an armed chimera. He is stunned, unable to believe what he sees. One of the knights points out another hybrid chimera, warning Ras. Ras identifies the chimera as a combination of an ogre and a demonic horse, a creature that even experts struggle to handle. Doubt fills him as he wonders if he will fail to save Ricky. Gripping his sword, Ras rallies the others, commanding them to prepare for battle. At the same time, Ricky regains consciousness and finally gets up. Ricky wakes up, confused, and wonders where he is. He questions why he is there and where the priest went. Looking around the room, he notices no one else is present. Then, suddenly, Ricky turns around and sees Shino's body in a flask and is shocked by the sight. He wonders why Shino is there in such a form. Seeing Shino's condition, Ricky is unable to get words out of his mouth. He begins wondering why this is happening with them, even though they were the ones who were chosen by God. Ricky thinks how this was supposed to be a blessing, but realizes that maybe the blessings sometimes can become curses. Unable to compose himself, Ricky starts crying but forces himself to regain composure, realizing he needs to leave immediately. He turns away from the flask containing Shino's body and heads toward the door. However, just as he grabs the handle, he freezes, looks back at Shino, and silently promises to return for him. He then escapes through the door. As he runs away, Ricky thinks about the Janus Church and vows that they will not escape punishment for this. He continues running down the hallway of the church building, wondering about the noise he hears. He considers the possibility of a fight and hopes someone has come to save him. Suddenly, he comes to a halt, realizing that something is going on nearby. Looking around a corner, he notices blood on the floor, which scares him. He hesitates, thinking about going back, when Ras runs past him, shouting about an attack coming from the right and the need to escape. Overjoyed to see Ras, Ricky calls out to him. Ras, in the middle of blocking the Chimera's attack, struggles to smile and jokingly tells Ricky to call him Big Brother. However, Ras does not seem to be along. He is being accompanied by another knight with pink hair. Suddenly, one of the chimeras notices Ricky, turns around, and charges at him with its fist raised. Ras notices and orders him accomplice to block it. They rush toward the chimera, shouting for it to stop, but another chimera blocks their path. Ras, worried for Ricky's safety, yells for him to run. Meanwhile, one of the knights exclaims that they are stuck. Ricky, frozen in fear, tries to move but finds his body unresponsive. The monster rises onto its hind legs, preparing to attack. Ras channels his energy, calls out Ricky's name, and strikes twice with his sword, releasing powerful magical waves that hit the chimera. However, the chimera counters, throwing one of the knights back. The knight calls out to Ras, who stands still, calling for Ricky and crying. A large cloud of dust envelops the area, and Ras fears he has failed to save him. Ricky brushes off the dust, coughing loudly, as magic energy radiates from his body. He immediately calls out to Ras. Surprised, Ras sees the chimera's silhouette in the smoke and warns Ricky of there still being danger, urging him to run to safety. Ricky then runs toward Ras and hugs him. Ras looks back, worried about the knights battling the chimera. He then asks the knight about the situation, prompting him to explain that he can only last for 10 more minutes. After analyzing further, the knight corrects himself, telling Ras that he might not last for even 10 minutes. Ras then hugs Ricky tightly, realizing he cannot fight while protecting Ricky. He then asks Ricky to go up first. At first, Ricky objects, rejecting Ras's order. However, he soon understands that he is not helping Ras in any way, rather he is just holding him back. So he agrees, running off and telling Ras to return safe and sound. Ras raises his hand in acknowledgement but says nothing. Watching the monster closely and gripping his sword tightly, he vows to grind it into powder if it is the only one left. Meanwhile, Ricky runs down the stairs, trying to make sense of what happened. He recalls the moment when the chimera attacked him and remembers how light had scared it away. His stomach growls, and he reflects on the strange anger he felt when he saw the monster, similar to the anger he felt during his time with the gang. Just then, Ricky sees a door right in front of him and begins feeling. After reaching the door, Ricky opens it and steps outside. Catching his breath, he looks at the night sky and questions whether salvation and faith were all lies. He suddenly starts crying, thinking about his little sister, Anna, who is now alone in the orphanage. Moreover, Ricky thinks how he will not let those go away easily who dares to hurt his little sister. None of this is making sense, but suddenly, Ricky starts feeling unwell and is overcome by a terrible sensation, as if something is calling him. He walks through the forest, noticing dark energy under his feet, and follows it to its source. Meanwhile, the creator and Jamie are engaged in a fight. During the fight, the creator of the chimeras taunts Jamie for running away, remarking that he is really good at it. The creator then releases his tentacles and declares he will kill him. He throws several quick blows and loudly proclaims that Jamie must die. Jamie is surprised by the creator's relentless attacks. The creator quickly launches several of his tentacles toward Jamie, declaring that this will end him. Jamie takes off from a tree branch and dodges the attacks. Their battle causes huge explosions throughout the forest. Jamie smiles and notes to himself that the attacks are powerful and that he would not be pleased if even one of them touched him. He creates a sphere of magical energy in his hand, confident that his magic will be enough to ensure his victory if the battle continues as it is. The creator becomes enraged and calls Jamie a fool, taking off into the air and stating that the jokes are over. Jamie watches him closely, surprised by his next move. The creator raises his hand, declaring that Jamie should already be dead, and releases many tentacles, which gather around Jamie. The creator forms a massive ball of tentacles, attempting to trap him, but is shocked when Jamie is not captured. Instead, Jamie appears in a tree, unharmed. Furious, the creator loudly demands to know where Jamie has gone, and how he managed to hide. Jamie, taking a moment to recover, uses his magical energy and activates the Dark Dimension spell. The creator, surprised, realizes he has fallen into a trap but dismisses it as futile, sneering that such a move cannot hold him back. Breaking free, he flies toward Jamie. Jamie is astonished that the creator could escape his spell so quickly. The creator then points his hand at Jamie, creating 2 magic circles and unleashing the tentacle hurricane spell. Large tentacles emerge from the circles, attacking Jamie. In response, Jamie generates a barrier that the tentacles cannot penetrate. He observes the creator and admires his ability to combine the chimera's traits with magic. However, Jamie questions if this is the extent of his opponent's capabilities. The creator claps his hands together and expresses his surprise at Jamie's endurance, preparing for another attack. Before he can continue, Jamie interrupts, asking what the creator intends to do. The creator is startled to hear Jamie's voice behind him. Turning to strike with his tentacles, he grows confused when he cannot locate Jamie. Angrily, he demands to know how Jamie is managing to evade him, certain he saw him in front of him. Jamie releases a surge of dark energy and points out that the creator is blind, unable to recognize a clone. The clone, created with rank 4 dark magic, vanishes after making eye contact with the creator. Jamie channels energy into his hand and mocks the creator for his inability to evaluate an opponent's strength. He uses the body decomposition spell, which begins to affect the creator. Noticing his hand changing color, the creator panics and questions what is happening. Jamie smirks, explaining that the spell is magic that causes slow decay and collapse. The creator, furious, dismisses it as a cheap trick and tries to warn Jamie about the consequences of killing him. Jamie cuts him off, calmly stating that he has other matters to attend to. Jamie uses the black ball spell, conjuring a magic sphere made from his energy in front of him. Soon, multiple identical magic balls appear around the creator. The creator is taken aback and demands to know what Jamie is saying. One of the black balls touches a wound on the creator, and dark magical energy begins to break apart near him. He grabs his hand and lets out a loud scream of pain. Jamie explains that the black ball is a spell that amplifies pain threefold when touched, asking the creator what it feels like to endure suffering worse than death. The creator, enraged, insults Jamie, calling him a freak. Jamie smirks, noting his surprise that the creator can still speak, and casts the gravity spell. This spell causes the creator to immediately fall to the ground, where he crashes with a powerful explosion. Lying on the ground and writhing in pain, the creator attempts to speak. Meanwhile, Black makes a small sound. Jamie notices and acknowledges its effort, encouraging it to rest. Black disappears with another sound. The creator, struggling to rise, mutters something about the bodies inside him. Jamie comments on the immense pain that would kill a normal person and criticizes the creator for mocking his own body by filling it with chimeras. Observing the creator's broken state, Jamie doubts his usefulness, even as an undead. Placing a hand on the creator's head, Jamie decides to extract his knowledge through a spell. Suddenly, Jamie hears a strange sound behind him and quickly leaps away. Additional chimeras appear beside the creator. Realizing he miscalculated the number of chimeras present, Jamie focuses on his mana reserves and acknowledges that he has already expended too much. The creator loudly declares that Jamie will not escape with an easy death, but before he can act, his body is pierced by a blast of magical energy. Grasping the wound, the creator coughs up blood. Jamie smiles, suggesting that if the creator had died immediately, fewer problems would have arisen. He reflects on the creator's resilience and ponders how to kill him. Meanwhile, Ricky feels increasingly nauseous as he approaches but resolves to keep going. A powerful explosion suddenly erupts behind him, startling him. He turns and regrets his decision to proceed. Another explosion follows, hurling Jamie violently. Jamie slides several meters along the ground, racked with pain from the attack. He realizes he has no mana left. not even enough to conjure a shield, leaving him unable to avoid the incoming attack. Ricky notices Jamie and wonders what he is doing there. The creator, concentrating his energy, points at Jamie and declares that he should already be dead. The chimera gathers energy at its head, forming an intensely bright sphere. Ricky, with tears streaming down his face, runs toward them, calling out for Jamie. Jamie is shocked to hear Ricky's voice. As the chimera releases its magical energy, Ricky sprints forward, reaching out his hand. Alarmed, Jamie shouts Ricky's name in desperation. Ricky shields Jamie from the magical energy with his back and apologizes, explaining that his body moved on its own. A magic projectile strikes him, causing a massive explosion. Jamie's wounds bleed heavily, covering his face with blood. When he regains consciousness, he crawls to Ricky, calling his name. His body shakes with horror as he cries, struggling to speak. He looks at Ricky's lifeless, smiling face on the ground. Reaching out in terror, Jamie sees his bloodied hand and reflects that it has happened again. Someone else has died because of him. Memories of his past life flash through his mind, recalling moments surrounded by the bodies of people who had sacrificed themselves for him. An unknown voice from his past echoes, telling Diablo he must live. Jamie covers his head with his hands, crying as he remembers how others died to save him. Kneeling in front of Ricky, he whispers a plea for it not to happen again. The creator interrupts loudly, mocking the emotional scene and pointing out that the little test subject managed to create such a touching moment. He declares that he will end them both. Jamie's mind drifts back to his time as Diablo. He hears the voices of comrades begging for his help, students pleading with their teacher not to leave them, and a scar-faced man crying out that they wouldn't leave him, even after death. Filled with rage and anguish, Jamie creates a magical barrier around himself and Ricky. Releasing an immense amount of energy, he activates the primal power, rebellion against the divine. The chimera feels fear in the presence of this overwhelming power, and the creator steps back in shock, realizing that Jamie's aura has completely changed. The creator's hands tremble as he panics, recognizing the danger and deciding he must kill Jamie quickly. Jamie leans over Ricky with a wild gaze, muttering that he will return soon. Standing up, he releases an even stronger wave of magical energy and grimly reflects on how he had let this power slip from his mind. The very first power he ever created. Suddenly, a skeletal hand bursts from the ground, followed by many skeletons clawing their way up. The creator is stunned and demands to know what Jamie is. Standing amidst the rising undead, Jamie calmly explains that this is an army born to rebel against the deities and confront the 12 gods. He calls it necromancy. The creator laughs nervously, doubting that weak undead could kill him. Jamie tilts his head mockingly and snaps his fingers, commanding the skeletons to attack. The skeletons charge the creator, clashing with the two chimeras and their master. One chimera growls, swiping at the skeletons and shattering their bodies with brute strength. Jamie observes calmly as a skeleton, even with part of its head missing, rises again. He coldly remarks that his subordinates have transcended death. The creator backs away, trembling in fear, and cries out for them to stay back. Before he can finish, a skeleton clamps a bony hand over his mouth. Jamie releases a wave of dark energy, declaring the forest to be his domain, where death reaps death. He welcomes the creator to his hell. The skeletons attack relentlessly, knocking the creator to the ground. His screams of pain echo through the forest. Later, Jamie approaches the motionless creator, wondering if he is already dead. His eyes catch sight of a small green ball rolling out of the creator's mouth. Picking it up, Jamie studies it carefully and realizes it is a bead of life, an artifact charged with life force. He deduces that the bead sustained the creator's mutilated body. Smiling darkly, Jamie reflects that this exceeds his expectations and decides that the bead will allow him to surpass the limitations of his child body. Gesturing to the remaining skeletons, Jamie tells them they can rest and assures them that he will summon them again someday. The skeletons crumble, their energy returning to him. Jamie coughs up blood, acknowledging that he has spent too much energy. The rebellion against the divine spell remains too difficult for him to sustain. Struggling to stay conscious, he looks at Ricky's lifeless body and whispers that he cannot let him die like this. Instead of letting Ricky sacrifice his life, Jamie proposes making him his faithful servant. Concentrating his energy, Jamie casts a spell to resurrect Ricky. Suddenly, bright energy radiates from Ricky's body, startling Jamie. Ricky's body rises, floating above the ground and glowing with intense magical light. Jamie shields his eyes from the brilliance, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. An unknown voice reverberates, questioning what is happening. A goddess materializes, cradling Ricky in her arms. She gazes at Jamie and demands to know who he is to attempt to steal what belongs to her. Jamie stares at her in shock and whispers her name. Pyro. The goddess looks intrigued and remarks that Jamie knows her. At the same time, in the city, Lincoln runs frantically, shouting that he must inform the Count and that he needs to relay something urgent. Before he can continue, a girl swiftly cuts off his head with a single, precise movement. She sheathes her sword and mutters that he was a useless idiot. Turning her gaze outward, she declares that they must get rid of Hisa and that justice against heretics must begin. Meanwhile, RZ collapses to the floor next to the lifeless body of the slain chimera. Leaning heavily on his sword, he reflects on how he somehow managed to meet the deadline. Groaning in pain, he acknowledges that he is on the brink of death, but feels relieved that no one else perished. His thoughts are interrupted when one of the knights calls out to him. The knights rush to him, asking if he is all right. Raz, still clutching his sword, notices a bright, magical energy manifesting near him. His eyes widen in astonishment as streams of energy surround his body. He gasps in disbelief, questioning whether this could truly be the goddess Pyro. At the same time, Pyro addresses Jamie, asking if he knows who she is. Surrounded by her divine energy, Jamie stares in disbelief, wondering how she could descend there and recognizing the enormous problems with the law of causality from even one illusion. Pyro repeats her question, asking if he can hear her voice. Jamie clutches his head, his pupils darting frantically. She commands him to answer her questions immediately. Through gritted teeth, he responds that all he knew was that Ricky's holiness belonged to her. Pyro's expression hardens as she questions how he could still intend to turn Ricky into an undead. Jamie defends himself, stating that he just didn't want Ricky to die. Her anger surges as she retorts that being undead is not the same as being alive, and that turning Ricky into an undead is an ultimate disrespect for the dead. She demands how he can fail to grasp the value of life. Jamie clenches his fists in rage and accuses her of being a divine fool, claiming that she and her kind belittle life and have no right to preach about its value after sacrificing all of humanity. Pyro is momentarily stunned by his outburst. She looks at Ricky, as though trying to gather her thoughts, unsure of how to respond. Jamie watches her carefully, analyzing her reaction. Pyro finally speaks with resolute determination, stating that Ricky will become her apostle, and warning Jamie that if he turns Ricky into an undead, she will never forgive him. Jamie is taken aback, repeating the word apostle in surprise. The title carries immense weight, as apostles are the closest beings to the gods, their existence elevating them to the rank of priest. They possess strength worthy of the title of the strongest holy knight. Jamie grins, realizing that while he knew Ricky possessed godhood, elevating him to the level of an apostle explains why Pyro descended. He finds the situation much more entertaining than expected. Feigning contrition, he apologizes and asks how he can make amends. Pyro narrows her eyes and questions his sincerity. Jamie smirks and reveals that the darkness has already begun to consume Ricky, claiming that half of him has already become undead. Her eyes widen in shock as she demands if he even understands what he has done. Jamie suddenly clutches his head in pain, grimacing as he wonders what Pyro is doing. She glares at him and asks if he has a death wish. Through his pain, Jamie retorts that if he did, things would take a very bad turn because killing him would also destroy Ricky. Pyro frowns, unfazed by his words, and dismisses his threats as pathetic. Jamie, his voice steady, counters that there can only be one apostle. If she loses Ricky, she would need an incredible amount of time to find another. He points out that what matters more than the time wasted is that the presence of an apostle guarantees the gods unrestricted access to the world. Pyro remains silent, her expression tense. Jamie presses on, softening his tone. He reiterates that he has no desire to kill Ricky, emphasizing that Ricky is his friend. Pyro accuses Jamie of being a very vicious person, stating that he has made up a good story just to save his miserable life. Jamie responds by questioning why she made Ricky her apostle, pointing out that an apostle is no longer vitally necessary since the world exists as the 12 gods planned. He mentions the calm system they worked on together. Pyro becomes angry and demands to know how much he knows. Jamie raises his hand and explains that the holiest of the 12 gods, whose love reaches everyone, is so filled with this feeling that she received the power to destroy evil. He then speculates whether she was expelled. Pyro becomes furious, ready to say something, but Jamie smiles to himself, realizing the argument is over because she cannot lie, as it goes against holiness. She is forced to remain silent. Jamie reveals his past life's name, Diablo Volfir. Pyro is shocked to hear this name and demands to know how he knows it. Jamie replies that he is the man's legacy. Pyro internally struggles with this revelation, thinking it impossible because Volfir was elsewhere. She contemplates the situation and asks why this is happening now. Jamie extends his hand, suggesting they shake hands, but Pyro disappears, instructing him to come to her in Afton, where they will discuss everything in detail. Her magical energy gently lowers Ricky to the ground. Jamie reflects that if everything goes well, Ricky will become a very useful tool. Suddenly, Ricky regains consciousness and opens his eyes. He looks at Jamie and asks if it is really him. He quickly gets up, asking if Jamie is okay, why he is covered in blood, what is wrong with his purple eyes, and why Ricky himself is experiencing strange sensations in his body. Jamie questions how Ricky, even in this state, is worried more about someone else than himself, pointing out that he is now an apostle of the goddess, and at the same time, undead. Jamie admits to making him undead using dark magic and expresses his certainty that Ricky will hate him for it. Ricky smiles and calmly says that everything is clear to him. Jamie is surprised by his response and asks if that is all he has to say. Ricky agrees and adds that being a dark magician does not mean Jamie has to be evil, asserting that Jamie is a great friend. Jamie, acknowledging Ricky's kindness, admits that he sent him to a dangerous place and even tried to kill his sister. Ricky replies that Jamie saved him and did not harm Anna, so he still considers Jamie a good person. Jamie, about to call Ricky an idiot, notices the bright energy radiating from Ricky and is surprised to see Ricky's incurable wounds disappearing. Ricky explains that he thought his idea might work, and it turns out it did. Turning around, Ricky announces that Brother Ras is approaching. Jamie acknowledges this and says it is time for him to leave. As Jamie is walking away, he starts to say something about their conversation, but Ricky interrupts, asking if he really seems that stupid, and assures Jamie that they will meet again. Later, at the branch of the Zenith Church in the city of Hiese, a man bows before Argino, identifying himself as a judge associated with the Church of the God Zenith. He apologizes and explains that due to certain circumstances, he cannot reveal his name. Argino questions what the judges are doing there. The man explains that under orders from their superiors, they have come to hunt down heretics. He hands over a jar containing a chimera, stating that after doing everything possible, they discovered this. He reveals that Father Lincoln turned out to be a heretic and was executed after confessing. Ras, observing this, is surprised and realizes that the judges are using Lincoln as a scapegoat. The judge continues, explaining that this was an important matter kept in the strictest confidence of the church, and so they conducted an investigation. Ras interrupts him angrily, calling his explanation nonsense. Argino cuts in, ending the conversation. Smiling, he sarcastically praises the judge's courage, but then shifts to a serious expression and angrily declares that killing someone in his domain is unacceptable and asks if the judge wishes to die. The judge kneels down and explains that they were punishing sinners in the church. Argino responds coldly, asserting that he is the judge in these lands and no one dares harm people in Hisa without his permission. The judge, visibly trembling with fear, begs for mercy and addresses Argino as Duke in an attempt to make him listen to him. Argino, his voice icy, accuses the Zenith Church of God of crossing all boundaries. The judge, realizing the danger he is in but determined not to retreat, musters his courage, looks up, and accuses Argino of being too arrogant, warning him against turning his back on the church. Without hesitation, Argino swings his sword with incredible speed and severs the judge's hand. The judge cries out in shock and pain, while Argino, remaining calm, warns that the judge's other arm and head will be next if he does not leave the city. Clutching his severed hand, the judge silently reflects that this outcome is not what he had been led to expect by a certain girl. Meanwhile, Ras observes the situation in awe, recognizing how skillfully Argino has diverted attention from the chimeras and put the judge in his place. Ras feels confident that with this approach, they are certain to succeed. The judge, shaking with fear, kneels and apologizes profusely, promising that the church will pay compensation and pleading for forgiveness. Internally, he resolves to treat Hisa as an opportunity to expand the eastern lands and regain composure. Argino, ignoring the judge's pleas, walks away and declares that he will not change his decision to sever all ties with the Zenith Church of God. The judge, kneeling in defeat, accepts the outcome and agrees to leave. Ras reflects on the Duke's masterful handling of the situation and almost feels pity for their opponents. The Zenith Church eventually paid a large compensation and vanished from Hisa. Later, Ricky expresses his confusion about the sudden developments. As he and Anna receive a visitor, Anna looks at her brother and inquires about the visitor's identity. Ras kneels before them, introduces himself as the Holy Marshal of the Church of Pyro and a member of the Armatic family, and reveals that Anna will become the symbol of the Church of Pyro. He informs her that as the apostle of the goddess and a future holy lady, She will observe the world with holy eyes, and he vows to take care of her. Ricky, overcome with emotion, loudly confirms the truth of Ras's words and begins crying. He tries to express his feelings about Anna, but Ras reassures him, confirming that Anna will soon be able to open her eyes. Ricky embraces his sister joyfully, exclaiming how wonderful this news is. Anna, surprised by his reaction, smiles. The simultaneous emergence of an apostle and a saint signals impending troubles, and Ras silently prays for the strength to protect them both. Under the complete protection of the Church of Pyro, the two children are safeguarded. Meanwhile, Jamie Welton, also known as Diablo Volfir, contemplates his fate. He notes the division among the 12 gods into factions and suspects this led Zenith to create holy knights from chimeras. He also believes Pyro has become somewhat isolated. To confirm his suspicions, Jamie determines that he must travel to Afton. Standing in the garden, deep in thought, Jamie resolves to succeed and calls for his mother with a kind expression. Sears looks at him with surprise as she notices his unusual demeanor. Jamie approaches Sears and calls her mom again. She is surprised by this and asks what has happened to him. He tells her that he enjoys drinking tea with her and Sarah. His sister responds that they enjoy it too. Sears remarks that he usually finds such things boring. Jamie, surprised, admits that this has never happened before and wonders if she has guessed something. Sears asks if he truly needs something from her. Jamie thinks he will need to try harder next time, but replies that he is simply in a good mood. Sears assures him that he can say whatever he wants, and she will listen. Jamie, taken aback, hesitates before saying that he would like to visit her homeland, the city of Afton. Sears questions his sudden interest in the city. Jamie replies that he has heard of a mountain with huge water bubbles. Internally, he cringes at having to make up such an excuse. Sears, surprised, finds his behavior amusing and teases him, saying that if he doesn't really want it, they can postpone the trip. Jamie, embarrassed, quickly interrupts and insists, even going so far as to tell her that he loves her. This makes Sears happy, and she agrees to his request, calling him her beloved son. Jamie, feeling utterly humiliated, reflects on how he is supposed to be the great dark magician Diablo Volfir. Sears then reveals that she had already planned to visit Afton next week. Jamie realizes his efforts were unnecessary, and remarks that she was already planning the trip. He is eager, but also deeply frustrated. Sometime later, Jamie, still feeling depressed, mutters about Sears making him go through all of this. He thinks about how he will deal with Pyro when the time comes. Ras finds him and asks what he is doing. Jamie mentions that he was with his mom and Sarah. Ras, noticing his mood, asks why he seems so sad. Jamie dismisses it, saying that something happened, but it's nothing serious. Internally, he curses Pyro and wishes she would stay quiet. Ras, with a kind expression, reassures him that everything will get better soon. Jamie briefly wonders whether he should kill Ras. Jamie changes the subject and asks Ras what he is doing there. Ras explains that he needed to discuss something with the Duke. Jamie, surprised, asks if Ras met his father. Ras confirms this and says he felt it was important to share the news with Jamie himself. Jamie inquires further, suspecting it might be about a divine revelation from Pyro. Ras grabs Jamie by the shoulders and informs him that Ricky and Anna will go with him. Jamie considers this obvious since they are an apostle and a saint. Ras adds that goodbyes are not forever, and that Ricky and Anna will never forget Jamie. Ras expresses hope that when they meet again as adults, it will be a meaningful reunion. Jamie, growing angry, demands to know what Ras is implying. Unexpectedly, Ras hugs him. Jamie is taken by surprise and feels confused. Ras assures him that their friendship will not end and encourages him not to be sad because this is not the end. Ras leaves, promising that they will meet often. Jamie waves goodbye but thinks that Pyro should keep her followers under control. Sometime later, Argino admits that he does not understand what his father-in-law is planning. He wonders if they should bring Jamie to them. Sears remarks that not even her late mother could have managed such a situation. Argino questions if the father-in-law simply wants to see Jamie and mentions their departure tomorrow, asking if everything is ready. Sears reassures him, asking what could possibly go wrong. She rests her head on his shoulder and reminds him that they will be accompanied by the best knightly order of the Earl of Welton. Argino expresses his confidence in the order, but adds that he still has concerns. Sears cuts him off, confidently asserting that no one would dare to threaten them, especially since her husband is the Earl himself. Argino laughs, and the two sit together peacefully. Sears then mentions that Ras will also be with them, and shares how surprised she was to learn he is a holy marshal, a position that rarely leaves Afton. Argino reflects on the seriousness with which the Church of Pyro treated the incident, but admits he remains worried about Jamie. He notes Jamie's precocious strength and recalls an earlier incident where Jamie could not control his emotions. He expresses doubt about whether the knightly order could stop Jamie if it happened again. Sears reassures Argino, saying there is nothing to worry about, and recounts the day's events to him, concluding with her confidence in Jamie. Argino remarks that he would like to witness Jamie's progress firsthand. Sears agrees that everyone makes mistakes but emphasizes her faith in their son. Argino takes her hand and expresses gratitude for having this moment together before their departure. Sears shares his happiness, and they sit contentedly. Meanwhile, Jamie flies through the sky, overjoyed with his progress. He reflects that although the process of grinding the material into powder and absorbing it took time, the results exceeded his expectations. He attributes his success to his hard work. Speaking to Black, he notes that it is only a matter of time before he reaches the 6th rank. While acknowledging the distance he still has to go to regain his former strength, he is confident that he can now handle opponents of the same level as his old professor. Using his energy, Jamie floats above an old house. Later, Azard and Ryza kneel before Jamie, expressing their happiness at his return. Jamie informs them that he will be traveling to the town of Afton, which is far away, and will not be back for some time. The two disguise themselves as woodcutters. Ryza confirms that Afton is on the northern border and points out that the round trip would take about a month if done alone. Azard questions whether they will need to work with axes. Jamie, annoyed, asks if they have a problem with this arrangement. Ryza responds indifferently, while Azard agrees to do whatever Jamie commands. Jamie assures them that they will accompany him this time. Releasing his energy, Jamie recalls something he had long forgotten. Azard notices something strange, while Ryza asks what kind of magic Jamie is using. A door appears in front of Jamie, and he explains that it is his storage of the undead and that it will serve as their new home. They question if Jamie really called this place their home, expressing reluctance to live in such a scary place. Jamie observes their hesitation but notes that no one has openly objected yet. Frustrated, he kicks them and orders them to stop talking and go inside. Azard agrees to obey, and both step through the door surrounded by dark fog. Jamie reflects on how entertaining their clear expressions of emotion are, deciding they could become very useful with proper training. Sometime later, Azard emerges and admits that although he hadn't expected much from what Jamie called a vault, the place turned out to be better than anticipated. He notes that it is far more spacious than he had imagined. Ryza comments that while inside, it felt like something was filling them from within. Jamie explains that the energy they felt is primary power, as the space is created entirely from his energy. He adds that undead who rebel against the gods absorb this power and grow stronger because of it. Ryza expresses concern, asking if maintaining such a place is too difficult for Jamie. Jamie questions if Ryza is worried, prompting Ryza to bow and apologize for doubting him. Jamie assures him it is not a burden, or he would not have shown it to them. Azard then asks if Jamie could make them stronger immediately, adding that while the space is impressive, it is filled with bones. Ryza quickly understands his point and silences him before he can finish. Jamie, angered by their comments, declares they deserve to die. Later, Jamie feels a strange sensation and sees Argino holding him off the ground. He wonders why his father is treating him like a toy. Argino tells Jamie that he must protect his mother, sister, and friend, asking if they can rely on him. Jamie, feeling dejected, agrees. Argino hugs him, stating that they must all return safely. Jamie, embarrassed by the gesture, reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, a man introduces himself to the Order of Fear as Jack O'Brien, announcing that they will soon move out and explaining the plan. In the carriage, Anna expresses her wish that Ras could accompany them. Ricky responds that nothing can be done since Ras volunteered to accompany someone else. Jamie sits silently with them, thinking about the route they are taking. He considers it odd that they are prioritizing a safe but longer journey. Sears, sitting with Sarah on her lap, mentions that Sarah always falls asleep as soon as she gets into the carriage. She declares it is time for them to leave. Ras, riding alongside the carriage, offers to guard the rear, and Jack agrees. As they travel, Jamie notices Ras and wonders about Pyro's intentions. He considers that mentioning the name Diablo Volfir likely means Pyro either did not reveal anything to the other gods or could not. Jamie concludes that significant changes will occur once he returns. Sometime later, Sarah wakes up and starts moving around. Ricky greets her and leans closer, introducing himself as Ricky and confirming she is Sarah. Startled, Sarah begins to cry, which raises Jamie's suspicions. Jamie confronts Ricky, asking what he is doing. Ricky, trying to defuse the tension, calmly tells Jamie to relax. 2 days later, members of the Welton family sleep sitting next to each other in the carriage. Ricky sits nearby, gazing out the window. He notices his older brother galloping beside them and remarks that the others seem to be tired. Suddenly, Jamie wakes up and asks how long he has been asleep. Ricky replies that he has slept for about 2 hours, adding that he slept very soundly. Raz, riding alongside, comments that sitting in a carriage must be terribly boring, and offers to share an interesting story about the local Mayatre Mountains. He further mentions that there is a legend about the Mayatre Mountains here. However, Jamie expresses that it doesn't sound very exciting. On the other hand, Ricky encourages Raz to tell the story anyway. Jamie frowns, realizing that he had expected that these two would like such stories. Ricky then adds that Anna, who is still asleep, enjoys such tales as well. Raz then comes up with an idea, telling Ricky to listen closely so he can tell this story to Anna later. Raz then begins by recounting a legend about the Mayatre Mountains. He explains that a long time ago, when dragons roamed the skies and elves walked the forests, the mountains were originally one single rock. He continues by mentioning that on a peaceful day, 2 dragons appeared here. Hearing about the dragons, Jamie's interest increases significantly. These dragons included an evil black dragon and a benevolent blue dragon named Mayatre. Moreover, there was a woman who lived here. Mayatre used to love this woman magician a lot, but their love was doomed. Turns out that the humans and dragons were not allowed to be together by any means. As a result, the dragons who couldn't stand to see this decides to send the black dragon to find this magician woman and kill her. During their fierce battle, the rock split, and a stormy stream rushed through the valley. The evil black dragon was eventually expelled, but the woman magician also lost her life. Overwhelmed by grief, Mayatre retreated into the mountains, where legends say he remains to this day. Thereafter, Anna, who has woken up during the story, remarks that the story was very sad. She further points out how it is said that the frequent rainstorms started taking place as well. Meanwhile, Ricky is startled by Anna, wondering when she woke up. To answer Anna's question, Ras confirms, realizing that Anna knows about this story. He further explains that the minstrels refer to the rains as dragons' tears. Jamie silently contemplates the possibility that the legend might hold some truth. He realizes that the dragons were considered as mystical creatures during that time. After addressing Ras, Jamie then starts to ask a question, inquiring if there is a possibility that this story might be true. But before he can finish his questions, a lightning strike occurs. As a result, Anna lets go of a scream, scaring Sarah in the process, prompting Sears to try and calm Sarah, assuring her that everything is fine. Jamie reassures them that it is just rain, but he can't shake a sense of unease. As the carriage moves through the forest, lightning strikes a nearby tree, causing it to fall onto the carriage. The horses panic, and Sears restrains Sarah while screaming in alarm. Ricky immediately warns Anna to be careful. However, the bad luck seems to be on their side. Amid the chaos, Sears falls through the carriage door along with Sarah. Jamie, terrified, shouts for his mother and sister. Sears tearfully instructs Jamie to save Sarah first, but Jamie insists he will save them both. Using his magic, he creates ropes to pull Sears to safety. Seeing that his spell has worked, Jamie takes a sigh of relief, realizing that he has done it. So far, his plan seems to work, but his grip slips, and he begins to fall. Sears calls out to him in panic, but Jamie assures her that he has flight magic. However, this only gives Jamie a moment of relief. To his horror, he realizes that he can't use flight magic. He recognizes the phenomenon as burn mana, a high-level spell that completely nullifies magic in a given area. As he falls, a woman's voice addresses him, asking who he is. Furthermore, the woman questions Jamie if he is a dragon. At the same time, Jamie is startled, wondering if she has really said dragon. He plunges into a river and begins disappearing from the view. Meanwhile, Sears, desperate, tries to jump in after him but is restrained. She cries out, insisting her son is in the river and pleading to be let go. Holding on to the hope that her son can be saved, Sears tries everything but fails as Ricky continues to hold her back. Just then, Sears notices light magical energy surrounding her. Ricky apologizes, explaining that he only wants to help, but Sears interrupts, calling his name. On the other hand, Anna, held by Sarah, tearfully calls for her mother and brother before falling asleep. Ras kneels before Sears and reassures her, stating that Jamie's strength gives him hope that he will be fine, accepting the fact that his analysis might be a bit presumptuous. Sears then addresses Ras, but he continues explaining that this is only his optimistic perspective, but assures Sears of Jamie's extraordinary skills. He admits that the currents are dangerous, but is confident that once Jamie's magic returns, he will be able to escape unharmed. Raz even offers to go down and look for Jamie. Meanwhile, Ricky shows concern for Raz's safety. At the same time, Jack warns that the currents will be dangerous even for Raz. Ignoring their concerns, Raz assures Sears that he will return in 3 hours and not longer than that. However, Sears acknowledges the risk and tells Raz that it will be dangerous, even with Holy Marshal's powers. Even after knowing all this, Sears' concern for his son's safety sees no limits, as she requests Raz to find her son and bring him back while stretching her hand toward him. Raz then continues to get the blessings of Sears by kissing her hand, assuring her that he will return with Jamie. Later, in a cave, Jamie regains consciousness and realizes he is suspended by magical chains. Confused, he wonders where he is, what has happened, and who is responsible for all this. Just then, a woman's voice interrupts his thoughts, noting that he is finally awake. She stands before him and asks if he is a dragon. Jamie asks if he looks like a dragon. The girl replies that he really doesn't, but as soon as she sees him, she realizes he isn't far removed from dragons, though that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Jamie senses a strange hostility from her. She comments on how unusual it is for someone like him to have such potential, adding that the shape of his mana and the way he uses it strongly resembles dragons. Jamie wonders if the breath of his body is similar to that of a dragon. The girl continues, remarking that human mana breath is terrible, weak and stupid, incapable of imitating dragons. Jamie feels anger rising within him, thinking that people like her will regret underestimating him. She steps closer, noting that he is different and asking if he belongs to an elf tribe. She quickly dismisses the idea, saying even high elves are no match for dragons. Jamie responds bluntly, accusing her of being responsible for his predicament and demanding to know why she needs him. The girl grins and questions his arrogance, given that he is chained. Jamie retorts, challenging her for being tyrannical and arrogant herself, falsely accusing and kidnapping him. She approaches him and repeats the word kidnap mockingly. Jamie recalls the downpour, the lightning near the carriage, and the burning of mana, concluding it is no ordinary accident. The girl admits he is right, explaining that she dragged him there simply to see him for herself. Jamie's anger flares as he thinks about the danger she has caused his mother and sister. He stops himself, confused by his anger, and firmly demands she remove the shackles. The girl refuses, and when Jamie asks why, she smirks, telling him he looks funny in that position. Shocked, Jamie questions her response. She laughs, saying his current expression is even funnier, and admitting she almost doesn't want to free him. Jamie deduces from her behavior that she is the blue dragon, Miatre. He reflects that blue dragons are considered the gentlest among dragons, often sympathetic toward humans, much like humans are toward pets. He considers himself lucky that he hasn't encountered a cruel red or black dragon, or the infamous running dragon. He asks her why she has kidnapped him if she has mistaken him for a dragon. Miatre's expression darkens, her demeanor shifting to anger. She admits she has done it to kill him. Jamie feels her bloodlust and nervously asks if she will let him go now. She refuses outright. When he asks why, she replies smugly that it is simply because she can afford not to. Jamie wonders what she means by that. Miatre explains that if she uses him as an ingredient, she can likely create a masterclass Sparta. Jamie is stunned, realizing the implications of her words. A masterclass creation would surpass even his imagination. He catches himself, reminding himself that he is on the verge of death, and asks why she wants to kill dragons. Miatre's expression turns serious. She dismisses the question, saying it is none of his business. Jamie presses on, suggesting it might be because of her love for a person. The energy binding his wrists suddenly fades, and he falls to the ground, coughing. Miatre concentrates powerful energy on her finger, warning him that if he says anything like that again, she will ensure he suffers a fate worse than death. Jamie thinks to himself that his suspicions are correct. Carefully, he asks if Kanan's race has rejected him, and if she has betrayed her own race to save Kanan's life. Miatre becomes very angry when she hears this. She releases a huge surge of energy around her, creating water from it, and demands to know what Jamie understands about the situation. Jamie observes her reaction and states that if she had truly intended to kill him or turn him into Sparta, she would have done so already. He points out that everything would have been simpler if she had used the magic of brainwashing, but she hasn't. The room fills with water as he continues, noting that her actions show she is actually kind, so much so that it is hard to believe she is a dragon. Miatre recalls someone from her distant past who had said the exact same thing to her. Clenching her teeth at the memory, She removes the water and warns Jamie that this is his last chance, and there will be no other. Jamie falls to the ground, thinking that she is serious, and he should keep his mouth shut. Miatre remarks that he is a strange person, much like her old friend. Jamie asks her who she is referring to, and she explains that she means the man from the legends, the one who had been betrayed by humans. Meanwhile, Ras, standing by the river, observes the continuous rain and wonders sadly where Jamie might be. Miatre continues her story, explaining that this has happened 700 years ago and that the man's name was Canaan. He had been a dark wizard. Jamie expresses his surprise, repeating that Canaan had been a dark wizard. Miatre acknowledges that it seems strange for a being of holy magic, like a dragon, to fall in love with someone like that. Jamie agrees it is a little unusual, but internally marvels at how extraordinary the story is. Miatre elaborates, explaining that Canaan had turned to dark magic to uncover the truths of the world. Despite being human, he was a virtuoso sorcerer who managed to reach the 9th rank. Jamie is astonished and reiterates that no one had achieved such a rank over millennia. Miatre ignores his interruption and continues her story. She explains that Canaan had begun his search for answers long before meeting her. She had joined him, and together they overcame many obstacles and fell in love. Their happiness lasted until the Dragon Lord issued an order to destroy Canaan, labeling him as evil. The dragons obeyed and began their pursuit. She describes how she and Canaan escaped, although their powers were not unlimited. Canaan eventually told her to leave, saying there was a place even the dragons couldn't reach. He assured her not to worry about him and that he wouldn't die, no matter what they did to him. Miatre reveals that he took refuge in a ruin with strong magical restrictions that allowed only one creature to enter. The Dragon Lord then decreed that Miatre would be banished for 1,000 years. For a dragon, such a period is insignificant. However, just over 10 years later, Canaan returned for her, having already comprehended the truths of the world. She remembered Canaan holding her bound by magical energy in his arms and loudly challenging the dragons. He questioned how they dared to view themselves as the pinnacle of magic, claiming they weren't the strongest of all living beings. The Dragon Lord declared that Canaan had gone mad, and another dragon noted that the truths Canaan had discovered were beyond human comprehension. Miatre recounted how Canaan saved her, and they hid in the massive mountain to escape their pursuers. She trailed off, leaving Jamie to understand that Canaan had died. She explains that she had thought it would be better this way, believing Canaan would find peace. However, the dragons began systematically erasing all traces of Canaan, including records and even the people who had known him. Jamie wonders if this is the truth the dragons want to hide. Miatre concludes by saying that to protect the remaining memory of Canaan, she will remain in the mountains.